All right, here we go. Live on the podcast. I just wait till that shows up and that delay goes away. Let me just see if that's working. Just mute that. All right, guys. Okay, that's no good. Something's gone wrong with Facebook. Alright, if you guys can hear me, just put down a message in the chat. I'm just checking the stream through Facebook right now, making sure that that's alright, because we're live. Alright, there we go. I think that's it. Okay, let me go find that screen. Okay, so we're having trouble with streaming to Facebook. This may be an issue on Facebook's end. Alright, why am I hearing myself twice? Oh, there we go. Let me get rid of that. Okay, guys, welcome to the Shroom Live podcast. It looks like everything's fine. Took a few seconds just to get everything underway. But got a very special show tonight. We've got a very, I'm really excited to have this guest on, Dr. Greg Vinall. He's coming on in about 15 minutes. So my first bit here is just answer a couple of questions, get the show started, and say good day to everyone. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful time. It is sweltering here in Sydney. If you live in Sydney like I do, for some reason today it's just picked up and it feels like it's 35. Got the air conditioning running in the background, but let me know if that's annoying and I'll switch that off. But it should be okay from what I've heard. So first up, while the crowd builds, I've just sent out the notifications across all the platforms on Instagram. So there should be more people joining us in a moment. We've got a couple of places on Facebook that should be streaming, but if it's not, that's okay. Everyone should know where to find me. The Shroom Live podcast, the main platform here is on YouTube. And let me just get this cough out of the way first. It's not the virus. It's just, when you drink a bit of water, just trying to clear your throat a little bit before the stream and you breathe it in. You get a little bit down the trachea, so that wasn't good. Anyway, let's see who's here. We got Fishing with David. He's here. Nathan, New South Wales Fishing. He says hi. Riley Payne's here. JB Morney. Let's keep going down here. Alex Garmercy. Apologies if I butcher everyone. Some of your guys' names out here, especially if you're new here. Dean Davies. Let's quickly get through the list here. Perry's here. Ian Burdenshaw, regular here, says, okay, I've been dying for this. Yeah, absolutely. I've been dying to bring you guys this show. It's going to be a really good one. We're talking fish sensors. So just to set the stage for what's coming up in about 12 minutes, talking things relating to how fish can sense, their surroundings, relating to their anatomy, which we're going to be talking about sight. We're going to be talking about hearing and, various other things. So Greg's, he's been very generous to offer his time tonight on a Saturday evening to answer your questions. And, depending what you guys want, we might even ask you in, watching from behind the screen there, what you guys would like to hear, because he's a wealth of information. He can talk about practically anything from lure building to, like I said, the scientific aspects of it, to what he does, whether it's chasing mangrove jacks. This is your chance. But before we get there, you guys can grill me for the next about 12 minutes. Nick Will says, shout out from Bangkok. How you going, mate? How's it going over there? Hopefully everything's all right. Hopefully that the situation with with the health, the health situation, the virus isn't going so bad there. Jack Beats here as well. A few more guys. Bring your questions. So this is your chance. If you guys have questions about anything at all, while you guys get your questions up, hopefully you guys checked out my video this week. It was, chasing your bread and butter using the Squidgy BioTough flick bait in bloodworm. That was pretty interesting. We got one Brembo straight up on the Z-Man grubs, and then I switched over to that lure just to see what we could get. It was getting a few of them duskies, dusky flatheads on the drop. I like the glide action on that. Now it's a time to use slightly faster moving lures if you're fishing, you know, in the warmer waters, especially in Sydney, that temperature in the systems are starting to pick up. So, you know, faster moving lure, you might pick up bycatch such as salmon and kings and tailor. That gets, you know, that's on the pallet as well. So plenty of options there. And that's kind of the reason why I've started to move towards these faster moving lures rather than, you know, the slower drop grubs, for example. And what's that one? Let me just put that one up. That's okay. That's just a bunch of emojis from Jack Davies there. Perry Sullivan's got a quick question. He says, what's your biggest brim? My biggest brim is 47.5. Caught on a Z-Man bloodworm. What's it called again? The 2.5 inch slim swims. So it's a little tiny itsy bitsy paddle tail. So caught that fish at night, just casting along the mud flats. I think we're coming up to a high tide. I think it was a run-in. Might be mistaken there, but it was in the dead of winter in one of those bays. And, you know, the brim like to breed in the winter. And I think that they were schooling up in particular along that section of the Parramatta River. So I got really lucky there with that one. So put a few pieces together and, yeah, hit the jackpot. And I don't think I'll ever beat that, but, you know, got a whole lifetime to try to one-up that. So that's going to be really interesting. But anyway, if you guys want to chase brim right now, I think, yeah, they're all along the edges. They're a little bit finicky unless you're fishing really early in the morning at this stage. The water is clear. We've had a bit of rain, but I don't think it's really changed the coloration of the water at this stage. So that's, you know, they're my thoughts there. But yeah, so let's keep going down here. Any other comments, questions, if you guys have anything to add to that? Nathan says, how's the shorts channel going, buddy? Yeah, guys, I have a shorts channel. It's a bit of fun, so you guys can find that, Shroom Shorts. So look that up if you're interested. Who's this? This guy's called Shroom as well. What is this? He says, look at my name. We go, what? All right, no comment there. Let's go down. Ian Burdenshaw says, first off, I want to ask what Greg thinks of how fish in the surf detect lures in such a noisy environment. And it looks like the rest of the question got cut off. You know what, Ian? I reckon we'll have some answers for that. Greg will certainly have a good answer to that one. So let's hold on to that question. He's going to be coming up in at about, what is it, quick math, 7 minutes. So yeah, a bit of quick math for you guys on a Saturday evening on the Shroom Live podcast. Braden's here. He says, hey, Jason Green, how's it going? He says, hey, buddy, name my name. Let's keep moving down. What is going on here? So let's, what is this? Jake the Idiot 2 says, hey, remember me, bro. What is going on? I think tonight we're going to get a few trolls, Greg. What's going on? Fishing with David says, what's cooking, bro? Well, not much today. Just been preparing for this podcast, trying to put on the best show for you guys. Like I said, talking about fish senses, you know, detection of colors from the fish's perspective, you know, how their eyes work, you know, how the hearing may work, how it might relate to your, you know, increasing your understanding so that you can improve your fishing in ways that you couldn't imagine. So that's what's coming up in about 6 minutes. Ian Burdenshaw says, how scent can work in such a washy environment. Yep. Ian, you've got heaps of good questions here. I wish I had a pen and a paper. I'd write them down right now so that I can ask Greg in a moment. Yeah, Jake, I've been pretty good, mate. Okay, so David says, my question is, why are you... We're not getting any serious questions until Greg comes up, are we? I'm sweating bullets. Are you guys seeing that? I'm wiping off the sweat right now. You guys are putting me under the palm. I've got 3 lights on my face, so it's... The air conditioner's not doing its job. Okay, so we answered that question from Perry. Let's keep going down here now. Anyway, if you guys know right now, it's kingfish season. It hasn't come in full swing just yet, but if you're in the harbour, there's definitely plenty of reports of kingfish coming through the system. Botany Bay, as you guys have seen from my previous videos in the last month or so, plenty of them out there along the point, along the third runway, along the markers, along, you know, the northern side. There's plenty of squid, pretty much anywhere where there's weed. Now's the time to get out there and cast the line, or, you know, cast a lure or soak a bait, really. I think if you see them swimming against the edges right now, they may be a little bit hard to tempt. From my experiences at this stage, it's hard to tempt them with your plastics at this stage, because all along the edges of the Para, for example, I've seen plenty of schools of tiny bait fish right now and little prawns, and so they're switched onto really tiny bait. And so you got to get them at the time when they just decide that they want to have a go at your big lure. But otherwise, yeah, it can be hard going. I mean, I haven't tried with a fly yet. Maybe fly fishing would be the way to get them at this stage. I mean, you can still get them on lures. I've hooked up on plastics, but, far and few between. So, yeah, definitely the season is going to improve from everything that everyone's told me. It's not in full swing just yet, but it's already pretty good. I mean, if you head out early in the morning, you're more likely to see schools of roaming kingfish at this stage. Dean Davies says, what's your biggest flathead? And then Shroom answers back 70. No, that's incorrect. It's 92 centimeters from the Georges River. So he's a phony, guys. Let's go find the next question. David says, dude, those squidgy flick baits are mad. We were slaying the Taylor up this way in Victoria. Oh, nice. Good stuff. I really want to get a nice greenback this season. But we'll see. I haven't really hit any big models at this stage. All right, guys, a couple more questions, 4 more minutes, and then we'll bring Greg on. And that's the time when we're going to be talking about fish sensors, just to reiterate. Now, let's keep going down here. What's this one say? Fishing with Dave says, Inception. Shane's got a question. Shane says, hey, Shroom, looking forward to this one. Caught one small perch, nothing else on the Parramatta River today. Okay, nice one. So it's still far up the system right now in the upper reaches. Yeah, I want to get up that way. I think since that rain came down, the Georges River has been producing as well. So it's in those bits of sections of river where there's a bit more cover and a bit more color in the water. In the brown water. I mean, I caught my large one the other night. I was on a pretty big plastic, but like you said, you've been getting them around the Para in the daytime as well. So definitely they're permeating through the system right now. That fresh has awoken them. Kingy 2011 says, hi guys. Dean says, have you ever caught a stingray? Yeah, plenty of bottom feeding stingrays. Sometimes foul hooked. So sometimes they swim over your lure and you just accidentally hook one on the side. Yeah, not bit of a situation sometimes, especially on the light line. Okay, now I won't read that comment there from Big Johnny. Okay, let's be nice, guys. Let's play nice there. Ian Burdenshaw says, hey, Shroom, have you ever tried lure fishing or whiting in the Parramatta River at night? Okay, now what does that mean? That's pretty much all I do is lure fishing a day or night, 24/7, 365 days a year. Yeah, lures. Okay, you know what, Ian? That's actually a question that we can ask Greg a little bit later. I'm sure plenty of people would want to know how effective lures are at night. How they can perceive them, how they can detect them, whether it's through visual cues or sensory cues, through feel, through the lateral line, or through smell, through their olfactory organs, etc., etc. He's the person to ask. So, like I said, I should have got a pen and paper and jotted this down. Okay, guys, one last question. We're going to bring him on in a minute here. So, yeah, guys, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you hit the like button while I go find one more question here. Okay, let's see what Nathan's got to say here. Hello, Shroom. What would be a great episode? Would be a fishing episode with Robbie fishing in the ocean. Yes, that would be. I'd like to see him bent over doing some mechanical jigging for a kingfish. He knows nothing about it. It would be a great, yeah, that would be good. I think anytime you get somebody out into a situation that they're not familiar with, it's going to make for great viewing. And I've got plenty of situations where I would be completely out of my depth, like rock fishing, for example. You guys keep encouraging me to do some rock fishing or some catch and cooks, which I guarantee would probably end up with a really burnt section of burnt fillet of fish. It'd probably turn into charcoal straight away. All right, guys, we're going to leave those questions there. We're going to bring on Greg right now. And yeah, so we'll bring on the show. Right now. Let me just change a few things here and get going. Let's get rid of that screen there. We don't need the chat showing there. Now let's see if that's working. Now let's see if I can hear Greg at this stage. Hi Greg, how you going, mate? All right, that's no good. I can't hear anything. That's no good. Oh, there we go. It's the microphone. There we go. Let me just Okay, so it says, okay, so Greg, you're going to have to unmute your microphone. That's all right. These things happen on the live stream. It might take 20 seconds for it to register. But if you can see next to your picture, there's the microphone symbol. If you click on that, it will unmute that for you. So no, it doesn't. Okay, well, what we're going to do is I'm going to continue to answer questions in the meantime while we get that sorted, guys. So, Fishing with David says, bro, you're only sweating because I made you blush. Yeah, well, that's that's true. You guys make me blush every episode. Oh, there we go. Greg's here now. I think
we have
there
audio.
We go.
Can
we
you
have
hear me?
audio.
Technology, mate. Technology is on a Saturday night. It's always going to be a challenge. Hey, thanks for inviting me along. It's great to be here.
Oh, Greg, I've been really excited to have you on the show. Yeah, it's a privilege to have you here on the Shroom Live podcast. It's just something that I think that I've really looked forward to, especially me. I know the viewers really are looking forward to this show here, but in particular me, I really respect what you do, your knowledge, etc., etc., like everything about the products that you bring and the knowledge and the person that you are. So so how was your day?
Yeah. My day was good, but I've just noticed a comment there from John. He's saying, do the interview in sign language, mate. And John, I'm afraid I only know a few signals, and they're probably not suitable for a family show. So I'm not going to do the sign language thing. But my day's been great, mate. I've had
the one finger salute is the one I know, Greg.
Yeah, there's a couple of sign languages. Yeah, there was a couple of sign language symbols I could use, but probably not today.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Now, how's the fishing been up in Queensland? So you're up in what is it, Cairns, isn't it?
Yeah, right up in the far north. Look, it's been great. It's been very windy for the last few weeks, but every time the wind drops out, the fishing's good. And of course, the estuaries are always good. Even if it's windy, you can find a quiet corner somewhere to sling a few lures. So it's been pretty good. The water's warmed up. Unfortunately, the barra season's closed, so we've got to wait a few more weeks yet to target the barra. But there's plenty of jacks and plenty of other species, trevally turning up in the estuaries, and plenty of stuff out in the reefs, of course, the coral trout and all sorts of species out there. You never know what you might catch.
Yeah, so for those folks that might be heading up, from the southern states, and they would like to chase barramundi, when does the season open for them? So they may not be aware of that.
It opens on the 1st of February. So typically it closes from the end of November through to the 1st of February. So 3 months over the wet season, or the start of the wet season. That's when barras start to spawn. So we want to leave them alone, of course. Let those big girls reseed our population of barras. So we've got plenty to fish for over the coming years. So.
Yeah, I love chasing barramundi. I've only done it properly one time when I went up, to Weipa, to that mining town up far north Queensland. And, the first few that I hooked, I knew they were barramundi, but just the way that I played them, their gill rakers just sliced my leader. Yeah. So they just have a really unusual, unique fight. Just, they got the best of me, and I fell in love with that species from that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, they're one of those species, even if you're targeting small barra, you've still got to have a fairly thick leader on just for that abrasion resistance. So there's a few other species up here that like that too, but, they've got an abrasive mouth, so they'll wear through a leader. They've got sharp gill rakers, so they can cut through a leader. So, yeah, it's not unusual to use 60 or 80-pound leader, even if you're only targeting 60 centimetre fish, just for that protection from the sharp bits.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, I think everyone's keen to talk about fish sensors. Now, like I said, I've been harping on for the last 20 minutes now how excited I have been. I've been looking forward to this. Like for everyone back home watching right now, if you have any questions, make sure to drop them down in the comment section, and we'll just go through each of them. But at this stage, we're just gonna start off casually, and we're just gonna chat like mates, really, and just talk about.
Well, we are mates. You've been on my podcast. I've been on yours.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's right, Greg. So yeah, there's no need to be too formal here on the podcast. We have fun, basically. We're just a bunch of, we're all fishing fanatics in the chat here, and we just love talking fishing, really. And so this is, just the perfect way for the community to get together, one evening every month, and just talk fishing and, if they're having
Awesome.
a drink behind the screen, then that's all the more better.
Hey, look, I just noticed Bags asked a question about bananas on boats. You want to know the story about bananas on boats?
I would love to hear that story. I
You
mean,
know what the
that I
story is?
used to
Like,
be a believer that it certainly affected my fishing, but over time, I've come to
well,
accept that.
let me tell you where the theory about bananas being bad luck came from. It actually came from the islanders who were moving around between islands in big canoes, and they were transporting food with them, and they'd put bananas in with their other food, their other fruits, and that kind of stuff. And of course, bananas, as they ripen, they let go of a gas that causes other fruits and other foods to spoil. And so they found that when they put bananas on their boat, their food spoiled. So it was therefore bad luck. The bananas created bad luck. But interestingly, I had a chat with Dr. Ben Diggles a little while back, and we were talking all about fish scents and fish attractants. And he mentioned that the scent that comes off bananas actually is, fish can smell it and it actually can attract them. So it's an old wives' tale and a superstition that bananas bring bad luck, but lots of people still believe it. There's a story anyway.
Wow, that's interesting. So fish can smell. So I think it's ethene, isn't it, or ethylene? So I'm
Yeah, I think
surprised they
so.
can.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a yeah. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it's ethylene or something like that. Yeah,
yeah,
yep.
yeah. That's really interesting. So like I've seen a lot of people try to disprove this theory and catch a kingfish and hang a banana off its mouth just to make a point. So I always have a bit of
I
a
might have to make a banana lure, mate, and come up with some banana scent to scent it and see if I can catch a fish.
yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, just so that we can, just choose a general direction on where to, where to proceed with the podcast. I guess the first thing, I guess everyone would like to know is the vision, capabilities of, of fish, for example. In particular, relative to our own. So,
Yeah,
like one of those, there's plenty of questions that people are going to be asking later relating to what color is best for fishing this and such. Can they see this and that? Can they see UV? So I'll just casually just ask you, what you think about vision, for example.
yeah, sure. Look, it's one of those things that I think anglers probably overestimate the fish's ability to use vision. So, and that's a bit of a generalization, I guess. But we've become very focused and very fixated on color in particular. What color lure should I use? But quite often, fish can't actually see color, and it's not always to do with their eyes. Sometimes it is. A lot of the time, it's to do with their environment, right? So the water that they live in actually removes color, believe it or not. So the deeper you go into the water, the less colors are visible, and the deeper you go, the more the blues come out. And so you lose colors like red and orange and those sorts of things fairly shallow in the water, and as you get deeper and deeper, you're just left with blues. So what happens is, in a lot of conditions, fish only see sort of shades of grey. They see silhouettes and they see shadows, but they don't see the colours so much. And it's really natural for us to assume that they do see colour because humans are very visual animals, right? We
Yep.
see, vision's probably our primary sense. We see something and then we corroborate that whatever it is we've seen with a sense of smell or with our hearing, and all the other senses come into play. If you're blind, then you tend to use those other senses more. And people who have had vision from birth and then lose it, have to learn to use those other senses better. Now, fish don't necessarily need to be able to see something to find it. They have so many different ways to be able to find your lure. It's just not funny, right? And vision quite often is the last thing that comes into play, and color is even less important. So I say to people, don't focus so much on color. Focus on the action of your lure, focus on the diving depth, focus on matching the hatch, so getting a lure that's a similar size and shape to the bait that the fish might be eating, and then color can kind of come in afterwards. And now I say that with a caveat. There are times where colour's super important, and there are times where if you don't have the right colour lure, you're not going to catch fish. But they're few and far between by comparison to not having the right sound, or not having the right vibration, or not having the right, size and shape of lure, so that's getting in the fish's face and looking like something I want to eat. So lots of things about fish vision. Fish
Yeah.
are
So yep.
you
Yeah.
go.
Sorry. Yeah. Keep going,
Yeah,
Greg. I was gonna
fish,
add after you
apart
finish.
from colour, they also can't focus on things a long way away. So the way their eye works, the way they focus is very different to a human eye. So human eye the lens changes shape. So we've got muscles in our eye that change the shape of the lens to allow us to focus. Whereas a fish has a firm, fixed lens. It doesn't bend or twist. And their eye muscles, push the lens in and out. So it's a little bit like a microscope, but it gives them clarity out to about 6 meters, 7 meters, depending on the species. And beyond that, all they can see is kind of a blur, and they can see movement and they can see general shapes, but they can't really see any detail. So there's a lot there about fish vision, and there's a lot of superstition, and I get into fights all the time, Shroom.
Yeah.
Especially over the colour stuff, and people say, "Oh, I've been using green lures for perch forever, and they always catch more than the other colours." And that's probably because you've been using green lures 90% of the time, and you've got confidence in them, and so you do catch more fish on that particular colour just because you're using it more and you've got confidence in it. But when you start to look at it, and I spent time during my uni days, I spent time where we were using an underwater radiometer.
Yep.
And so what that does is it measures the light at the surface, and then you've got another sensor that you drop down into the water, and it measures the light at depth as well. And so you can compare the surface light to the light at depth. And it was a real eye-opener to see just how little light gets down to depth and how the wavelengths change, what colours are visible and what colours aren't.
So it detects intensity and also the wavelengths of light that make their way through the water column. And you've noticed that there was a huge discrepancy, and so there must be, I guess let's say absorption is the main factor as it goes down through the depths of the water. Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things. So absorption is definitely one. If there's if there's algae in the water, even if it's not, it's in sort of really fairly low concentrations that you can't even see with the naked eye. If there's algae in the water, if there's a little bit of sediment in the water, if there's turbulence that's creating bubbles, all of that will either absorb or scatter light. But even just a little bit of ripple on the water surface, right? If the light is hitting the water at an angle, it tends to, a proportion of that light reflects off. And so we have dawn and dusk for us is that sort of half hour to an hour just before the sun rises or sets. For fish, it's a much longer period of time, because as that sun starts to get low in the sky from sort of 2, 3 o'clock onwards, there's a lot less light penetrating into the water. So that time period, or that low light period, is much longer for fish than it is for us.
Yep. Now, just going back to that color, because you talked about 101 different things there, and I'm interested in every facet of that explanation, from how their eyes work and focusing to the physical properties of light traveling through the liquid water medium, and then also you've got that second factor being that irrespective of the properties, the physical properties of how light travels through water, you've got the way the eye, the anatomy, the function of the fish's eyes differ to ours. So I think most people like to attribute human properties to an animal, and what we see is pretty much what they must see, because we have eyes, they have eyes, but that's not true. So just to make it clear to everyone, so if we're on the surface of the ocean, and you've got, I guess the sun is kind of like yellow light, but let's say it's white light. It's got frequencies from every color of the rainbow together forms white light. So as so a lure that looks one of my favorite colors is called watermelon red. Everyone in the chat knows that I like to use watermelon red, and watermelon red is basically a transparent green material. It's like grass green, and it's got little bits of red glitter spread out in the material, so it's suspended in material. And that's that's just something that I've been accustomed to using. Now, whether that's the best color or not, who knows, because color may not be so important. So on the surface of the water, when you and I look at it, it looks like watermelon red. But what happens once that we put the lure in the water, say about a meter or two? What's going to happen then?
Okay, so let's say that you're doing this experiment, you're putting the lure in the water, and you're doing it out at sea, so there's no influence of the coastline, so no sediment, not much plankton, that kind of stuff. And you're doing it on a calm day when the sun's right overhead, right? That's when light penetrates the deepest into the water. So what happens is that the longer wavelengths, the red and orange wavelengths, they tend to get absorbed by the water faster, right? And this is in clean, clear water. And then the blue wavelengths and the purple wavelengths, they can penetrate deeper into the water column. So what tends to happen is those orange and red colors start to disappear. Now, that doesn't mean the lure becomes invisible. What it means is that the fish can only see shades of grey or blacks where there would have been red or orange. And if anyone who's ever done any snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef, for example, and you see a coral trout and underwater it looks green, and you get it up onto the surface and you can see that it's red, but down at 10 meters or so, there's no red wavelengths. So just to take a step back, Shroom, the way our eyes work, and this is the same for every animal. I get people say all the time, oh yeah, but fish have evolved in water, so their eyes are adapted, and so they can see colours even if we can't see colours. But really it's a case of the colour has to be there to be able to see it in the first place, right? So the way our eyes work is that, as you say, that white light comes down, it's got all the wavelengths, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, right? So they're all the wavelengths that make up white light. Now that light has to bounce off an object and come to our eye for us to be able to see it. Now if that object reflects all of those wavelengths, then it appears white to us. If it reflects none of those wavelengths, it appears black to us, right? What happens if it absorbs some of the wavelengths is then we start to see colour. So for example, if we're looking at a tree, the leaves look green to us, that's because the red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo and violet wavelengths are being absorbed by the tree. The green wavelengths are being reflected and they come to our eye, and so we can see them. And this is the same for every animal, right? And every animal, whether it's a bird, a reptile, a mammal, a fish, an amphibian, any animal, in the back of their eye, in the retina, has what we call photochromatic cells. And there are two kinds of photochromatic cells. One kind are called rod cells, and they can see light and dark, they can see contrast. And the other cells are called cone cells, and they're the ones that see colour. Right? And so we know, for example, nobody questions, is a dog colourblind? We know a dog's colourblind. How do we know? We know because there's been studies done. You can actually take, cells from the retina of a dog, and you can put them under a microscope, and you can stimulate them with different light wavelengths, and you can see what causes a reaction, what causes this chemical reaction that the dog's brain then interprets as colour. The same thing can be done with fish. Right? So some species of fish can see a massive range of colours, and some of them can see UV. Not all of them can, but some of them can. Right? And then other species of fish, and for example, billfish, a lot of billfish don't have the right cone cells within their retina to be able to see reds, oranges and yellows. They can really only see greens, and greens not very well, and they can see blues and purples really well. But those cone cells in a fish's eyes have adapted and evolved, and so they get what we call a dual cone cell. There's two parts to it. So they can actually distinguish really, really well between different shades of blue. Now, for a billfish, that's really important because you're looking at a blue bait fish against a blue background. So being able to distinguish between shades of blue that humans can't see, that all look the same colour to us, is really important to a billfish. It's not so important for them to see those other colours because there's nothing out in the deep blue ocean that's like that sort of colour. Now, if you look at freshwater fish, a lot of freshwater fish have adapted cone cells, dual cone cells that are more in the red-orange or the blue-green sort of range. Right?
So it's like the opposite side of the spectrum, really.
Correct. So so there's all kinds of things, and we could go on and on and on about it. Someone's saying my audio's not good.
Oh, no, they're just having a go at you. No, your audio's fine, Greg. Your audio's fine.
All right, cool. All right. So we can go on and on for ages, but as you say, at the end of the day, what tends to affect fish vision a lot of the time is their environment. And I say to people, okay, if I put you in a dark room and I'm wearing a yellow shirt, what colour does that shirt look like to you?
It'd probably look either black or white if
you can see it at all, right?
Tiny,
there's no yellow light there, is there? There's no yellow wavelengths there. And that's exactly what water does. So it removes those wavelengths. It's like looking at things through a piece of blue cellophane, right? And the deeper you go, it's the thicker the cellophane is, the more the colours are filtered out, right? So that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's how light and colour work underwater. Now, if you're fishing on the Great Barrier Reef and you're fishing in shallow water, clear water, colour can be really important there, right? If you're fishing for trout in clear crystal streams, colour can be important there because there is the opportunity for them to see colour, right? The other thing is that quite often when we're targeting species like barramundi, flathead, a lot of those species that feed on the surface, when you hold a lure above your head, doesn't matter what colour it is, hold a lure above your head and look at it with the sun behind it and see what colour it looks like to you, right? You've got the bright sun behind, all you can really see is a silhouette, right? Because you've got light flooding in. Now, we can see more than a fish can in that circumstance because our pupils dilate, so they restrict the amount of light that comes in and make it possible for us to see without causing pain. Fish don't have
Yes.
dilating pupils, right? So they
Yep.
can't actually do that. And the way they regulate the amount of light that comes into their eyes is if it gets too bright, they go deeper, or they go and
Yep.
find a shady spot to sit, right? So that's
Yep.
part of the reason that fish often sit in the shade during the bright of the day.
Yeah. Now I wanted to just expand on that point where you were making before about billfish seeing blue colors, mostly shades of blue. Yeah, that's because they live in the depths of the oceans where the wavelengths of light that that are able to exist in that depth, they're mostly just a blue wavelength, so they have to be able
Yeah,
to distinguish little differences, to survive. Whereas, in the freshwater, streams where you're talking less than a meter or 2 meters at max, then you've got pretty much all those other wavelengths coming through, and you can see red, you can see yellow, orange, etc., etc.
yeah,
And maybe the blues aren't so important, and like in evolution, if you're not using something, you lose it. So
use it or
you
lose it.
lose the
Yeah, yeah.
ability to, yeah. So
But I think,
I
and to
also,
go back
yep.
to the billfish, there's all kinds of theories fly around, but billfish have got the best visual acuity of all the fish, right? And
Wow,
that's because they've got big eyes. And it's interesting that for a long
bigger is
time,
better.
bigger.
Bigger is
Well, I
better.
mean,
That's what she
it's the
said.
same as the camera lens. The more light you get in, the more you can do with it. And if you're down at depth, you've got very little light, so you need big eyes to get as much light in as you can. And the
Yeah,
interesting thing is when you look at the billfish's brain, so fish have a bilobal brain. They have two lobes. We've got four, right? They've got two. But the frontal lobe is where they do that's the part of the brain that processes vision. And in billfish, it's absolutely massive. And so for a long time, scientists thought, well, that's why that must mean billfish have great vision. But what they worked out eventually was billfish swim really fast, and they need a big brain to process the images really, really quickly, or they crash into things before they see them. Right?
right.
So
They
it's
need
really
they need
not
a fast
about
processor.
yeah. So it's really about speed rather than being able to see further or being able to see more detail or whatever. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff out there.
Now, before we get back to fish's eyes, I just want to ask you about these questions that have just come up about squid eyes. Now, I don't know, how much you know about invertebrate eyes. Broken Gun 101 says, what about squid eyes? Can they detect colors, for example? Jason Green's got a question along a similar line of thought here too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
what do you think, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely. Squid are very visual hunters, more so than fish. And this is why squidding is usually better when the water's clean. They have very, very good vision, much better than most fish, and colour can be really important to them. So yeah, have lots of different coloured squid jigs in your box.
Yeah, and their eyes they're superior to. They have better eyes than us, don't they? They're just the design of their.
Oh, I'm not sure about that, but they certainly have some of the best eyesight under the ocean. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
Okay, now getting back to Fisher's vision, and we've I think we've talked, you know, quite comprehensively about color. What about, say, contrast detection? Like, is there
yeah.
something there in how the eyes and, say, the rods and the cones and the retina, how that might tell us something more about how they can detect? Because it seems to be in a situation where if you're under the ocean, color not so important, so therefore detecting shapes and moving images is more important to a fish.
Correct. Yeah, and you can see that, as you say, various parts of an animal's anatomy evolve over time. And if you look at the fish's retina and you compare it with the human retina, now don't quote me on the exact numbers here, right? But I think from memory, it's roughly in the human eye, there's roughly, I think, one cone cell for every 20 rod cells. Okay, so there's one cell that detects color for every 20 that detect contrast. Now, when you go
Yep.
to a fish's eye, it becomes 1 to 40, or it goes up to sort of 1 to 250. If you look at walleye, for example, freshwater species in the US, they've got a huge number of rod cells. Now, what that tells us is those eyes are really, really strongly adapted to seeing silhouettes and shapes, right? So, and not so strongly adapted to seeing color. And so, if you're
Yep.
looking at lures, and this is one of the important things to understand about color is if you're looking at lures that have more than one color, then you're getting contrast. Right, so if you've got spots, if you've got stripes, if you've got bars, you've got kind of markings on the lure, splotches or whatever, that's giving contrast, and the fish can see that far better than they can see color, right? And they don't see a lot of detail, generally speaking.
Yep.
They
So
don't see the detail that we can. So that's interesting. The other interesting thing, Shroom, that I think the most important thing about fish's vision is their ability to see flash. And I say to
yep.
people, if you think about, you're out on the water on a boat and you can see another boat coming towards you from the distance, what's the first thing you see? It's not the
You
color of the
see,
hull. It's
no,
the
you see
it's the
when
sun
there's a
off the
sudden flash
windscreen.
when the sun
Yeah, flash of light.
just
Yeah, so
reflects into your eye. Yeah.
correct, and it to the point that it can hurt your eyes. It can be hard to look at, right? So you can see that from a very very long way away. You can see that flash, right? Fish
Yep.
can see that flash underwater too. It's a really sharp burst. It's still, underwater it doesn't get as intense as it does above water, but they can still see it. And what things cause flash underwater in a natural environment where there's no human beings? Well, the only thing I can think of is scales. Right? If
Scales,
you
yes.
watch a school of bait fish all turn in unison, there's a big flash. So flash is a really really strong attractant for a lot of fish, and they can see it from a very long way away. So it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. Just to make it easy to understand for everyone. So, for example, when I say that I like to use the watermelon red color, which is green with glitter dispersed, that might be creating that little bit of flash that gets their attention. It's not so
Could well
much that
be.
it's red; it's that they can pick out the shape of it and the silhouette of
Yep.
those speckles, for example.
Yeah. But I think, as I said at the start, we're very focused on fish vision here. We're very focused on what fish can see and can't see. But like I said, they've got so many ways of finding lures that don't involve vision. And to give an example, during my uni days, I used to go fly fishing for trout in southwest Victoria, and there was a particular spot that I used to fish during the winter. This was before there was a close season. There was probably shows how old I am, mate. But anyway, there was a particular spot that I used to fish where you go down there in the dead of night, and you go down there when the river was in flood, and it'd be like chocolate. And it was
Yep.
under a bridge, so there was a couple of bridge pylons there. There was heaps of turbulence, lots of noise, and I used to use a 3-inch Matuka or streamer fly. And if I landed that fly in the right spot where I knew a trout would be holding, they would find it every time in the dead of night. Now, they
Wow.
couldn't see it, they couldn't smell it. It was moving very, very quickly,
Yep.
but I could catch trout every time on it. So vision's only part of the picture. And if you think about lots of other animals, you think about dogs, moles, bats, just about lots of other animals find food or find their way around or navigate using anything but vision. It's the last
Yep.
thing they do. I mean, I was walking my dog this morning. She just suddenly went off to the side and found a dead bird that she wanted to eat. Now, she didn't see that; it was buried under leaves. She smelt that, and that's how dogs find food. Fish find food in so many different ways that vision is really the last thing. Going back to color though, one of the things that I've often theorized about, and this is my theory, so I'll throw out. There's no scientific
That's
evidence.
okay. I love theories, Greg. I like
So
discussing
this is my
theories and
theory.
coming up with reasons.
Have you ever had one of those days, and I'm thinking trout here, but have you ever had one of those days where the fish are following your lure and they'll follow your lure and they'll get really close to it and then they'll just shy away?
Oh, always, Greg. Every
Right?
single time I
Okay.
don't catch a fish.
That's when I will start thinking about color, and I'll start changing colors, because my theory is those fish have homed in on the sound or the vibration or the action or something about that lure, and it's attracted them. And then when they've got close to it and they've got close enough that vision actually comes into play, something
Oh, right. Yep.
something's told them that there's not something not right, and so they shy away. That's my theory anyway. So give that a try next time you've got fish shying away and not striking your lure.
That's actually a very common occurrence in Sydney.
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of people in the chat might, especially in the warmer months when you're winding back in your squid jig or your float or your lure, a kingfish will come up behind it and then it looks every bit legal or a meter plus and it turns away at the last second. And I reckon that
Yeah,
it's just had a good look and decided, no, sir, that's not for me, and turned. And it's just said, that's
yeah.
fake, or nah, that doesn't look right.
The other thing, fishing Sydney Harbour, the other thing you've got, of course, is that the fish are very educated, and so they can, they see a lot of lures, they hear a lot of lures, they smell a lot of lures, they get to know what they should eat and what they shouldn't eat. So sometimes they just get curious, I reckon, and they come chasing it after it with no
Yep.
intention of eating it, and and they just shy away from it.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk more about fish's vision at night and a little bit more on that because that's definitely
Mm.
one of those can of worms. Everyone's always got a thought on, should you use lures. But first of all, I'd like to give a shout out to El Haj. Thanks for supporting the stream with a donation. Guys, if you're enjoying the show, make sure you hit the like button. Make Greg feel welcome here. Drop your questions down below. It's a great night. I'm really enjoying all the questions and the discussion. Like, I really hope Greg is really bouncing off me and enjoying how I'm contributing as well. Like, I'm really interested in this stuff, and I've got my thoughts as well, just like Greg, and it's good to learn off him. So but just a funny question before I talk about fish's vision at night. Santa Dad Isaac says, Greg, have you ever caught a blobfish? Now, this might be for the younger audience.
I can't say that I have.
Do you know what a blobfish is?
No, please enlighten me. I've got some ideas.
It's if you're under 15 years old, you might know what a blobfish is. It's the social media TikTok. That platform there. There's all these videos of an apparent cute little it's like a puffer fish, but it sucks onto the bottom of rocks and like flat surfaces. It's got a suction on the bottom, and it looks like a weird yellow tiny ornamental fish. And so I think Santa Dad is probably he's talking about those. So that was just a bit of a funny
and
question.
Where are they found, Shroom?
I think they're all deep sea. Every time I see videos of people doing catching crabs and lobsters in their nets, they might pick up a few of these blobfish in the net, for example. Yeah. So, but yeah. Anyway, back to some serious questions. There, that was a bit of like
I've never
comedy.
got a blobfish. Sorry to tell you.
I love to get one of those, Senator. Now, I use lures at night, so I've always believed that they can see it. If not, they can at least sense the movement in a lure that's not moving too quickly. At least if it doesn't have a tail, I kind of lose a bit of confidence. But I know that with the amount of light just from the sky reflecting down from the moon, I know they can detect it, because otherwise, how could they exist? How can an animal that's at home in the water suddenly lose the ability to navigate when it gets dark? That just, that doesn't make sense to me. But what do you think would happen if they turned out the lights completely? You had a fish with no vision. Yep. Like, how would that work? Do you say for example we had a yellowfin brim born without eyes? Would I be able to catch it with my lures?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I say, a lot of the time we assume that fish can see lures, and we assume because we're visual animals and that vision's our primary sense that we rely on most heavily, we assume that fish are the same. And I'm not sure why. But, I mean, if you think about bats, for example, everybody understands and knows that bats don't see things. They use sonar. They use sound to be able to find things. Dogs, as I said, use a sense of smell. Pigs use a sense of smell. Lots of animals use senses other than vision. And fish are among those. So they've got a whole range of senses. And to give a classic example, I mean, the lateral line is the obvious thing, right? And there was a study done in a laboratory situation where they had schooling fish, and they took some of the fish out of the school. And for some of them, they applied a chemical that deadened the lateral line so that they couldn't they couldn't use their lateral line. And others, they used a chemical that temporarily blinded them. And so they put these two groups of test fish back in the aquarium with the fish that hadn't been treated with anything at all. And what they found was the fish that had been blinded went back into the school, and they could swim in unison with all the other fish. And the fish that had their lateral line deadened but could still see perfectly couldn't rejoin the school. Right? Wow. And it's all about the way they sense movement and the way they sense their proximity to other animals using the water around them, using the lateral line and the movement of water. So a lot of the time, fish, when they're feeding at night, they're not using vision so much. They're using these other senses. Now, some of the species that we target, and barramundi is a classic example, jewfish are another one, tragdeer are another one. I'm not sure, kingfish might be as well, I'm not sure. But there's a group of fish out there that have a very specialised eye. They've got a thing in their eye called the tapetum lucidum, right? And tapetum lucidum is a kind of reflective retina that concentrates a little bit of light that's there and enables them to see better in the dark than what other fish can. So, and then again, if you look at the walleye, for example, as I said earlier, they've got massive numbers of cone cells and a big pupil. So they're getting as much light in as they can that way. So there are certainly species that are adapted to seeing better in the dark, but even if they're blinded, they can find food, no problems whatsoever. And another good example is, if you drag something like a lure through the water, or if it's a bait fish, even just swimming through the water, it leaves a trail of turbulence. Now, we can't see this, but it leaves a trail of turbulence, and fish can actually follow that trail of turbulence in the same way as a bloodhound can follow a scent, right? They latch onto it and they follow that trail until they find the source, and hopefully, the source is a food item and they eat it. So lots of ways they can find a lure that don't involve vision at all. But I love lure fishing at night, and my favourite lures at night, people used to say, use a black lure and fish on the surface because it throws a silhouette, and strong silhouette, fish can find it. Yep, couldn't agree more. But I've used black deep diving lures on completely moonless nights, and I've caught fish, consistently. Black brim, especially during my uni days. Used to love catching those at night on black lures.
Yep. Yeah, I watch, this is a little bit unrelated, but I watch a bit of Formula One, and they do a lot of wind testing, like aerodynamics testing. And so they put, I mean, I guess they put them in these tunnels and they do computation studies. And, you're leaving, basically, it's like as though a fish is traveling through water. You put an object in a wind tunnel, you're leaving vortices behind, and that turbulent water, like obviously we can't detect it, but, our computers can, and the fish can too, from what you're saying.
Yeah,
and so they
and
can
so you sometimes see, if you're in a situation with clear water, up here on the reef is a classic example. You could cast a lure out and you could be winding it in, and a fish could swim through the vortices that are left behind at right angles, and then just suddenly turn and start following your lure. And what's happened is they've latched onto that little trail of turbulence, and they're going to find out what it is. And remember, fish, they don't have hands, so if they're curious about something, what do? They follow it, they come up, they nudge it, or they take it into their mouths. That's how they examine things, because it's the only options they've got. So that's how they find your lures in the dark.
Yeah. Now, just to make it a little bit more simple for everyone, so for those that don't know what a lateral line is, how does that relate to our anatomy? Like, what part of our senses is the lateral line for a fish?
We don't have anything like a lateral line. So lateral line's a little groove along the side of the fish, and it's got these tiny little hairs in it, and there's a whole sensory system, and it detects changes in water pressure around the fish. So in the case of schooling fish, if you've ever wondered how a school of bait fish suddenly all turn in unison, all at the same time, it's because it's not actually a conscious thing. They don't think about it. It's actually a reaction to the pressure away from the fish next to them turning. And so they all sense it and move at the same time. And it's an instinctive thing. Right? But they can also use it for hunting. They can use it for finding prey. About the best example I can give, or about the best analogy I can give, is, when you're out and you get a bit of breeze blowing over the hairs on your arm, sometimes you can feel that breeze. I mean, that's a very, very crude example because our sensors aren't set up like that. And it's lateral line is basically an extension for fish of hearing. So fish can hear sounds at a lower frequency than what human ears can hear. They can't hear sounds as high as what human can hear, but they get down to a point where it's too low even for the fish's ears to be able to hear it, and that's where the lateral line picks up. So it's kind of a crossover between sound and vibration.
Yeah. Now, this might be unrelated, but how we can feel? Well, I guess the word is touch. We can sense things physically touching things. I mean, what part of the fish has the sensation of touch? Like, I used to associate touch with the lateral line in a way.
Yeah, no, I mean, they can feel things just as much as we can on their bodies. I mean, the scales, obviously, they don't have nerves in the scales. So, but typically fins and the sides of the faces, they're the places where they have the most nerve endings. That's where they're going to feel things the most. The tail is very sensitive as well. And so, species like threadfin salmon, for example, have got the well-evolved pectoral fins, which are evolved into sort of thread-like fins that they can feel around the bottom and find bait fish with. That's a good example of touch. The other interesting thing is that fish don't have taste buds in their mouths like we do. Well, they have some in their mouths, but they have taste buds all over their bodies. And I often say you wouldn't want to be a catfish, right? Because some species of catfish have taste buds over their entire bodies, and they're groping around in mud all the time. Now, a human being has about 10,000 taste buds on our tongue, right? Yep. These things have got 30,000 taste buds on their whole body. So imagine what it's like grubbing around in mud and slime and the bottom of ponds, and you can taste everything, right? So fish don't actually have to take anything into their mouths to be able to taste it. There's a bit of a crossover between taste and smell for fish there. So that's also interesting.
Yeah. Shall we talk about smells first and then go back to sound? How would you like
Yeah,
to?
sure.
Yeah. So because
Yeah,
we did get
so,
a few questions about scent, throughout the chat. I've skipped
yeah,
over it, but now that we're talking about taste and smell, I guess they're related.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So, look, my take on scents: fish have extremely sensitive sense of smell. Right? And we often hear, this story that a shark can smell a drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and well, that's actually an exaggeration. But most fish anyway, have just as good a sense of smell as sharks do. But what they smell is different to what human beings smell. So if you think about our sensory system, we've got a pair of nostrils. We inhale through those nostrils. The air goes into our nose, goes into the nasal cavities, and inside there we've got the olfactory system. So there's some little cells in there that pick up whatever's floating on the air, and they cause a chemical reaction that the brain then interprets as a smell. Fish have a similar thing. They've got nostrils, so there's two pairs of nostrils on the front of most fish's heads, and so there's one on either side, or two on either side. An anterior one, that's the front one, and the posterior one is the back one. And basically, water flows into that front one and out of the back one. And as it goes through that little cavity in the
Yep.
fish's snout, there's a whole bunch of cells there, same as us. The difference is that it's water and it's not air. Right. So in order for a chemical or a compound or something to get into the fish's olfactory system where it can smell it, it's actually got to be dissolved in water. And this is where
Yep.
there's a lot of misunderstanding, because a lot of the things that people are concerned about fish being able to smell are not actually soluble in water, or if they are released into water, they tend to float. Right. So if you think about things like sunscreens and insect repellents, most of that stuff either sticks to the lure and isn't going to come off, or if it does come off, it's going to float. And only a very small, there's a small chance that some of that's going to get into the fish's sensory system. So we find people, they wash their hands vigorously because they don't want to get, the scent of petrol or sunscreen or whatever on their lure, not realizing that the soap they're using is actually much easier for a fish to smell than the
Yep.
stuff that they were trying to wash off. Um, so scents can be really, really important. Now, I should mention also that something that fish smell really well is proteins, and they smell salts, and
Right.
incredibly sensitive to it. So if you think about northern hemisphere species like salmon, and some of the certainly the salmon, they find their way back into the streams that they were spawned from. They go out to sea, they grow big, and they go back into these streams to spawn. And they find their way back into those streams by the smell of the water. They can smell the compounds, they can smell the salts, and they can navigate by smell, right? So
Oh
very, very
wow.
sensitive
Yeah.
to smell.
I never knew how that happened. I just assumed it was some geophysical magnetic waves
Yeah.
in their
Well, there
brain
has
that
to
they
be, and
align.
nobody knows the full detail, right? But there has to be something like that going on to start with, because they go a long way from the river, so they go further than what they could possibly smell the change in water quality, right? But
Yep.
and then they find their way back to within proximity of where that water's coming down, and that's how they navigate from there. So look, there's lots of theories, and nobody absolutely knows for sure. It's one of those mysteries that
Yeah, I
we've got.
guess the good thing about the scent, the aspects of scent that you've just explained in terms of the sense of smell, that shouldn't deter anyone from putting on sunscreen. Then it's just,
Yeah,
a lot of people put the excuse up that they don't want to use sunscreen to protect themselves because they think it's going to deter the fish. But
yeah.
sunscreen, it's what is it, titanium oxide or silicon oxide, whatever it is, that's insoluble. So that shouldn't be a factor anymore.
Yeah, correct. I mean, sunscreens have got a whole bunch of different compounds in them. So yeah, the zinc and the titanium compounds, they're the active ingredients. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff in sunscreen as well. So some of that maybe is less, is more soluble or whatever. But I think what I was getting at with the salts is we have salts on our skin and we have proteins on our skin, and fish can smell those really, really well. So my short answer is scents are really, really important. But I did an interview just recently with Ben Diggles, who, as I mentioned earlier on, he's the guy who was basically one of the first people to do research on Australian fish to develop a scent, and he was instrumental in the development of Squidgy's S Factor scent, right? And so Ben did a whole bunch of laboratory experiments, and he was basically treating um, odorless pieces of carbohydrate with a whole bunch of different scents. And he got these scents from all over the world, but largely from the US, because at the time, the bass fishers especially were using all kinds of different scents. And what he found was, and again, don't quote me on the exact numbers, Ben might jump down my throat if I do that, but I think he tested something like 22 or 24 scents or something like that. And what he found was there was about 3 or 4 of them that worked really well and attracted fish to this odorless, tasteless carbohydrate. There were a whole bunch that just didn't seem to have any effect at all, and there were some that actually repelled the fish. Right, and then he went a step further, and what he found was if you put, even with the ones that attracted fish, if you put too much scent on, then it became too strong. And he likens it to putting chili on your food. You put a little bit of chili on, gives you a nice burn. You put a little bit more on, maybe you get a bit of a sweat up. You put too much on, and suddenly it's just not pleasant to eat anymore. And so he found that if you put too much scent on, it actually becomes counteractive. But look, I use scents all the time, and the ones I generally use, S Factor's one, and the Berkeley Gulp scent is the other one. Mostly S Factor, to be honest. And there's some good Australian ones around as well. But they haven't had, as far as I know anyway, and I'm happy for anyone to correct me, but as far as I know, they haven't had the same level of testing that S Factor and the Berkeley Gulp scents have. And Berkeley Gulp did a lot of research in the US. They had the scientists at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute do a heap of work on scents over there. Whether they transfer to Australia, I don't know, but I think the results, particularly on species like snapper with Berkeley Gulps, they're pretty conclusive. They're definitely a deadly lure. So I suspect the scent plays a big part in that.
That makes me very happy, Greg, because everyone that watches my videos knows that I use 2 scents, and they're both the scents that I use, and they're both the scents that I push. So everyone knows that I use S Factor and the Gulp lures and Gulp scents. So there you go, guys.
And look, and I don't think, unless you're putting too much of the scent on, I don't think there's ever a time where it's a bad idea to put scent on. Yeah, and there's certainly times where scent can make a big difference. And if you're masking those proteins, I mean, fish can smell amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. They can smell those really, really well. And they know when we make up a burley mix, people often want to use an oily fish. So they'll use pilchards and stuff to make up burley. That oil just floats up to the top. The fish can't smell it. It floats up and it drifts away on the current. What they can smell is the protein, right? They can smell that mushed up protein, the flesh of the pilchard, much better than they can smell the oil, right? So, and obviously that protein carries some of the oil as well. But it's really important that it's a really important fact that they can smell protein really well. So if we're putting bait on or putting lures on with our hands, we're leaving protein on that. We are leaving a human scent, and a little bit of S Factor or Berkeley Gulp that's going to mask that. So it's always a good thing to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that I've noticed now is that I shouldn't really slap on too much S Factor or Gulp gel scent. So what I normally do is when I get desperate and it's not working, half the tube goes on my lure. So I should refrain from doing that.
Well, is it working for you though? Because at the end of the day...
No, it hasn't worked.
Okay, so it's just costing you money. But look, with all of these things, if you're doing that and it's working well, don't fix what ain't broke. Yeah,
no, certainly, I, just through personal experiences, it's hard to back it up unless you've done a scientifically sound experiment. Just empirical data from my own experiences. Really, I did find that those scents seemed to work for me. So, but it was very hard to basically come out and say, no, these scents, I swear my life on them that they work. No, I could never do that. But having heard that you've said that, there's people that have done some sorts, at least bits of scientific testing, kept some controls, tested some variables, and not stepped outside the boundaries. Now, of course, it might be in the US and, fish species could be a bit different, but if it, like they're still fish at the end of the day, there's more reasons to believe that there's a lot more evidence to support that they would work here than they wouldn't, that they wouldn't have any effect at all.
Yeah. Look, I'm really glad you said that, because this is, and it's not just about scents, it's just about everything in fishing, it's really hard to do an objective experiment, from science. This is my scientist hat on. It's very hard to go out in a boat and try a couple of different things and say what's working, what's not working. right? And so by doing scientific experiments, what you're basically doing is removing all the other factors and all the other variables, so there can only be one thing that's making a difference, and you're testing that one thing. And that's been done extensively with scents, and particularly with S Factor. And there may be other Australian ones that have been down that process as well. I'm just not aware of them. And that's why I use the S Factor, because I know it's been through that process. I know Ben Diggles is a very smart guy and was heavily involved in that. So the other interesting thing, Shroom, the other interesting thing that fish can smell, and I don't know, maybe there's some of this in the scents, I don't know, but they can smell something called bile acids. And what bile acids are is they're actually an excretory product that fish excrete after they've been feeding. And so it's a breakdown of protein. So when a fish has been feeding and it excretes bile acid, and another fish swims into the general vicinity and smells the bile acid, it knows that there's been feeding going on in that area. And so it starts to pique its interest and starts to get an appetite. So
so it's like a trigger. It's like when someone yawns, everyone yawns in the room at the same time. So if they detect this byproduct of feeding, then they're going to want to feed. It's safe to feed, or it's palatable, etc., etc. I don't know the reasons, but that would, yeah.
Someone's been feeding. There's obviously something around. I want to feed. Yeah.
And so they're less picky then. So I've noticed sometimes when not a single fish has been hitting the lure, and then you hook up to something unrelated. You know, say I'm chasing kingfish and I'll hook up to a trevally. Suddenly the kingfish are excited.
Yeah.
That fish is just kicking around, and they don't want the trevally. They want They want whatever the trevally ate, which is my lure.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's right. And the same thing happens with bass. You know, if you talk to anybody who fishes a lot of bass tournaments, they'll tell you, you can be dropping lures on a school of bass for an hour, hour and a half, and nothing's happening. You hook one fish, and suddenly the whole school gets interested. Another good example of that, I saw a study where a group of guys who were diving on the barrier reef, and they were swimming around amongst massive schools of fish, and there were sharks and all sorts of things. And basically all these fish were just swimming around. Not too concerned, and they netted a fish and then cut off one of its pectoral fins, which these days is probably not kosher, but that's what they did. And they released this fish, and so suddenly they had, amongst the school of fish, they had an injured one, and it took a matter of seconds before predatory fish moved in and cleaned that one up. And then once those predatory fish had fed, then they started feeding on some of the other fish as well. So there's definitely a bit of stimulus comes. The fish communicate a lot by vibration and by body language. People don't realize just how good they are at communicating with each other, and that's one example of it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people these days, they trim the fins off a yellowtail scad here in Sydney, at least, just to, I guess, slow it down, or give the fish a little bit of a struggling motion or action when it's kicking in the water.
Yep.
Like, I mean, I personally don't do that, but if the yak at the end of the day survives the time that I put in the water, it ends up being let go. But, yeah.
Yeah. Look, and to be honest, no yak is going to outrun a yellowtail kingfish anyway, and certainly not if it's got a hook through it. So I'm not sure if it makes all that much difference. So I don't think I'd be bothering to do that either. But I understand people do. So yeah.
I guess there's another reason why they do it, not for yellowtail kingfish, but I know that there's a high chance that they do it for John Dory, because they believe John Dory are more ambush predators lurking in weed and structure at the wharves, and they're slow swimmers. So slow down a yakka, and suddenly you're in business. But like I said, I don't mutilate the fins of a fish.
Look, that makes perfect sense to me. The John Dories, like you say, they're ambush predators. And keeping a yakka in that ambush zone, if it's swimming at full pace, is going to be difficult. So perhaps that works. I'm not a bait fisher, so I don't know. I haven't tried it.
Now, just a quick comment from John about the scents. He says, I used Procure mullet, but I'm putting in an order for S Factor and golf tonight. You've done it now, Greg.
Perhaps I should buy shares in the S Factor factory. Hey, look, I don't want to run down. Procure mullet might work. I don't know. I haven't tested it. I've just stuck with the ones that I know. I've had lots of scientific research done on them. So, look, I don't want to say that Procure mullet's a bad scent. I'm not saying that at all. But definitely the ones that I use are the S Factor and the Gulp.
Yeah, so my thoughts are the same. So my thoughts are, yeah, those two scents have some scientific research backing them up a little bit. So that puts, you know, those scents a little bit ahead for me, and they're my experiences as well. But that's not to say that all these other scents on the market would necessarily by default be ineffective. So they could be more effective for all we know. It's just somebody has to get out there and do the testing. That's
That's
basically
it.
it. I mean, even testing it, it's so difficult to do any scientific controlled study, at least by anglers anyway. I just don't see
Yeah.
anything that's really. You can draw too many strong conclusions besides general trends that it might be a positive effect or a negative effect. You couldn't really quantify to some effect and say, oh, yeah, well, every time you put on this much grams or milligrams of S factor, it does this much percentage of improved
Yeah,
attractant.
there's
You
so
know,
many other
that's
factors.
just, yeah, so
Yeah, and I mean, even if you think about, think about the human population, then, if everybody who's here on this live stream today all walked into the pub at the same time and looked at the menu board and ordered a meal, we'd all order different things, right? And so is 1 cent going to work for all species? Is 1 cent going to work for all individuals within a species? Who knows? But look, there's definitely, I think my personal view is, and my personal experience is that there's definitely times where scent make a difference, and just use it frequently, but sparingly is the way I go about it.
that's right. Yep. I agree, Greg. And yeah, so yeah, we'll move back on to what we were talking about, which I've already forgotten about. So we were talking about was it sound, or is that the next thing that we're going to talk
Sound,
about?
yeah. Let's
Yeah.
move on to sound. Sound's really interesting. Sound's one of those things that people really underestimate or overlook because they don't understand it. And probably the fact of the matter is that nobody really understands it, to be honest. But fish, like so many things, fish don't hear the same range of sounds that.
This is a comedy comment. I'll cut you off there. Nicholas Cook
Yeah,
says, "So fish shit attracts fish. Learning heaps."
and I tell you what, folks, if you ever come up north and you're fishing for sooty grunter, in some of the freshwater impoundments up here, look underneath the trees where all the cormorants are sitting, and I can tell you what the sooty grunter will be feeding on. Right, it's a very, very popular way to catch sooty grunter. So, and if they are what they eat, then I probably wouldn't be putting a sooty grunter in the pan. Anyway, let's move on to noise. So, you see people in the tackle shop picking up lures and shaking. They go, "Oh, that one's got a good sound. That one's nice and loud." But fish actually don't hear the same range of sounds that human beings can hear. Right? So human beings can hear basically from around, I think it's around 1,000 or no, it's 400 or 500 hertz up to 20,000 hertz. Right? Fish can hear from a couple of hundred hertz up to 1,500 hertz. And the example I give is it's a bit like a dog whistle. Right, so dogs can
Yep.
hear up to about 45 or 46,000 hertz. We can only hear to 20,000. So if you blow a dog whistle, that's about 26,000 hertz. Right, so it's beyond our hearing range, but the dog can hear it no problems whatsoever. So can bats, so can kangaroos, so can lots of other animals. If you blow that whistle even harder, you're making it louder for your dog, right? But you still can't hear it. Now rattles are the same. So fish can hear. Most species can only hear up to about 1,000 hertz. Once you get up to
Yep.
1,500 hertz, there's a handful of species that can hear above that. But they're basically animals that can only hear very low frequency sounds. And so I did an experiment a little while back where I actually made a wooden lure, I made a stump jumper, same size, same shape as a stump jumper, and I put a rattle in it, so a timber stump jumper, and I had the plastic stump jumper as well, and I recorded the sound of both of them, right? And the plastic one sounded so much louder until I went and filtered out all of those frequencies that a fish couldn't hear. Right,
Yep.
and suddenly the wooden one was much louder noise. Now, does that mean that it's going to attract fish? Well, I don't know, and it probably depends on the species. And I give the example. There's another aspect of sound as well. Is there's quality of sound as well as quantity of sound. So we focus on volume, but if you think about whether the sound's attractive to a fish, that's another whole thing to get your head around. So the example there I
Yep.
give is, if let's say you're going to the pub to buy some beers to take home and drink, right? And you get to the pub and there's a really good band playing, right? The odds
Yep.
are you're probably going to go in, sit down, have a couple of drinks, listen to the band, right? But if you get to the pub with the intention of sitting and listening to a band and the band's absolute rubbish, right, you're probably going to grab a few travellers and go home. And I reckon fish are the same. Some fish are curious species, or the sound might pique their curiosity. Other fish are a bit shyer, or they're in a situation where you're in a small stream or something like that. There's not a lot of background noise, and a really noisy lure might be might just be overkill and might scare them away. But the thing to understand about sound is, underwater, sound travels 5 times faster than it does through air, and it travels further than it does through air. And fish can usually hear a lure, even one without a rattle. They can usually hear it long before they can see it. Now, if they've had a bad experience with that sound, if you're using, say you're using one of those, rattling spot or something like that, a lure that makes a lot of sound, you've caught a bass on that lure, right? And you put him back, right? The next person who comes along and casts that rattling spot is probably going to find that bass is not going to eat the lure. It's had a bad experience. It recognizes the sound signature of that lure. It's not going to eat it. Now, in the same way as a whole school of fish can be turned on when one takes a bait, right? Whole school of fish can be turned off if one of them reacts negatively to the sound, right? So if you've got a school of bass, one of them starts to take off in the other direction when they hear this lure from miles away before they can even see it. The rest of the school is also going to be on alert, and you're probably not going to get a fish out of that school, right? So sound's really, really important, and it's really important, especially in places like around Sydney, where there's lots of anglers, there's lots of lures, and the fish start to recognize it, right? Because as I said, they can hear the lure a long way before they can see it. So it doesn't matter what color it is, doesn't matter what size it is, what shape it is, they've heard that sound and gone, I know what that is, right? They're turned off before the lure's even got to them, right? So now, sound's really important.
Now I'm just going to explain a little bit of it in simple terms, but before I go on, if I've missed your question in the chat, because I'm trying to concentrate on, obviously, on the talk here with Greg, it's fascinating, so I'm not reading every single message, and your question has been skipped. Make sure to drop it down there, and so that I get a second chance to see it. But basically, when we're talking about sound, you've got frequencies, and frequencies determine how high-pitched, say, a sound is. So high frequency means high-pitched, low frequency means low-pitched and deeper, for example. Human hearing can, we know what we can hear. We can hear deep to high-pitched, but we can't hear past a certain point of high-pitched frequencies, which dogs can hear. But you're saying the fish are, obviously, their environment, because of the way sound travels through a faster medium, they can hear these really low frequencies. And so something that we rattle in front of us, in front of our, our ear canal, might sound pleasant to us, but it's not a part of the hearing range for them. And so once you filter out what they can hear, it's completely different, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah. And then it comes down to the fish's experience as well. Right, so let me give you another human example. I was sitting home the other day with my young daughter, and she heard an ice cream truck, and I reckon it was 10 blocks away, and I reckon it took half an hour to get that 10 blocks to our house. And by that time, she's standing out on the curb, waving her money in the air, and she was getting an ice cream come hell or high water. Now, fish are the same. If there's a sound that they recognise as this is a food item, then they're going to be on alert. They're going to be looking for that sound. They can determine which direction sound's coming from underwater. Human ears can't do that underwater, but fish ears can. So they'll go looking for that sound. On the other hand, if you were out, say you're out on a night out, or you're out at the park or something, and you hear gunshots, you're going to head in the opposite direction, right? So if the fish have experienced that sound before and it was an unpleasant experience, they're going to head in the other direction as well, right? So I would be more inclined to have a whole range of lures in my box that have a whole range of different sounds than to have a range of different colors, right?
Yep.
That's how important it is to me. And there are species, where you want more sound, and I'll certainly add rattles to soft plastic lures. And when I make hard body lures, I'll put rattles in some of those. There are species where you don't want sound, and there are situations where you want sound and don't want sound. So there's so many unknowns with sound, but people are more focused on color, and it's far less important in my view.
Yeah. So the person that you see at the shops who is shaking 2 lures, one on each ear, and they're going for the low thudding, rattle rather than the hollow rattle. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Everyone tries to get that low thudding sound. Yeah. There's no merit in that, because what we hear is completely...
There actually is some merit in that. So a lot of plastic lures, they'll fill them up with ball bearings, right? And it's a bit like a guitar soundboard, you know, so it amplifies the sound. So you've got a whole bunch of ball bearings inside a plastic hollow body, and that makes a massive sound. Now, if you're fishing for a species that's really curious or really aggressive, that might be exactly what you want, right? But often that can be too much, so you've got to use it in the right situation. When I'm making timber lures, I'll typically put one rattle in. There'll be one ball bearing, and it'll be a large one, right? And the reason I do that is it creates a low pitch sound, not just a low pitch sound, but also a vibration that the fish can feel through their lateral line. Now, if you're trying to imitate something like a yabby or a slow moving bait fish like a carp or something like that, then that's going to be much more effective than a high pitch rattle with a lot of small ball bearings. But it's horses for courses. There are times where those small ball bearings will work really well.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
experiment.
that makes sense. Yeah.
I don't have all the answers. I have some knowledge, but not all the answers.
Yeah, I mean that's great. I mean that's I mean like you said earlier, there's no, I mean unless someone's done a completely solid scientific study, everything's controlled. We're never really going to find out, you know, the final answer to every question, and that's what makes fishing, you know, different to every other sport. Really,
Mm,
it's not an exact science here. Something that works for you or me may not work for somebody else. Everyone's got their own experiences, and that's what
yeah.
makes it wide and varied. And every experience is different. And yeah, sound definitely. Like I do believe, you know, sound has a really big impact. I mean, you know, that like the Japanese lure makers, they, for example, cicada lures, for example, they try to get that droning
That buzzing.
cicada
Yeah.
sound with the way that the lure may waddle across the surface of the water. You know, whether that's true or not, it gives me the confidence that it's as good a replica to the real thing in plastic form with two trebles. So,
Mm, mm. So we've got a question up from Ian. I might address that one if you like.
yep,
So, because it's a really good question, and I'll be straight up with you and say, look, I don't have a firm answer, right? But it brings me back to that example I gave earlier on, where I was catching trout on flies in very turbulent water, very muddy water in the dead of night. They were finding those flies, no problems whatsoever, and it couldn't have been vision because there was no light. You would imagine that it can't be lateral line because there was so much turbulence. It was right behind a bridge pylon and water was flowing fast. So how do they find it? And my theory is, and there's no scent on those flies either, by the way. So my theory is that they're using all of their senses. And if you talk about again about jewfish in the surf zone, they have that tapetum lucidum, so they can see a little bit better in dirty water and after dark. But I think a lot of it comes down to just using all of the senses. And you'll find quite often in the surf zone, you know, when you get a bite, it's never going to be, or it's generally not, a very soft bite. You get a bite, you get a serious aggressive bite. That's because they have to they have to grab things fast because all their senses are confused by all the turbulence and all the noise. And so if something goes past, they're going to grab it, right? So
yep,
to some extent, it's a proximity thing, and it's using all of the senses as best they can. But yeah, the surf zone is a great place for predators because the bait fish are also confused by all that turbulence, all that noise. That's why they're there, and so the
yep.
predators will be in there chasing the bait fish. So yeah, it's a great question, Ian, and I'm sorry I don't have a much clearer answer than that for you.
Ian's got another question here, and he says he's seen a video where people lowered their voices because they're worried about spooking the fish. What are your thoughts on that, Greg?
No, generally speaking, and I've done this back in my younger days. We were trout fishing and we were watching. Yeah, we had some trout feeding in front of us, and we fired a shotgun over them, and it didn't spook them at all, right? But if you stamped your foot on the bank, they were gone in a flash, right? So talking generally speaking is not too much of an issue. Um, Noise in the boat can really, really be an issue, and particularly in places where they're highly pressured and fish recognise sound. So dropping a hatch on your boat, dropping a sinker in a tinny, something like that, can really create a noise because it creates a vibration in the water as well. The boat hull is in contact with the water, whereas when you're speaking, the sound's coming out of your mouth. It's not in direct contact with the water, whereas a boat's different. Likewise, personally, I don't listen to a radio. I turn off my my marine radio. I turn off any sort of noise in the boat when I'm fishing. I know people who don't, and some really good guides who actually have music playing while they're fishing and reckon it helps them out. personally, to me, that seems like an unnatural noise. And depending on the species I'm chasing, I'd rather
Yep.
be a bit more stealthy. So yeah,
Yeah, and also they may not be able to distinguish what the sound means to differentiate a natural sound from an artificial sound. But if you drop a sinker on a tinny, they know that that's not natural. They know lines with some baits are coming out right away.
yeah. And look, generally speaking, the sound, a constant sound, like a motor running, that doesn't generally spook them as much as when you clunk the motor in or out of gear. You know, so those sharp, sudden sounds tend to spook them more. Um, but obviously, in places where they do cop a lot of pressure, they will recognise a motor and they can shut down. Even electric motors, you'd be amazed how much noise an electric motor can make. And so when I'm using my trolling motor, I never go above about 4 on the speed control, because
Yep.
they can be quite noisy.
Is that noisy to our ears or their ears in that
Noisy to
sense?
the areas, yeah. I mean, we can hear a little bit of noise, but it's creating turbulence and it's creating noise underwater because you've got a motor that's and a prop shaft that's in direct contact with the water, so it does create underwater sound.
Yeah. And also
Yep.
transducer pings and all that, the sounders.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. If you look at the frequency of transducer pings, and you compare it with the sound frequencies that fish can hear, most fish can hear, then generally speaking, you'd say no, they can't hear it. But I'll be honest with you, if I'm in shallow water, particularly in a very quiet situation, I'll turn the sounder off unless I really need it.
Yep.
Just because it's one of those things. I don't think it makes a difference, but I'm not going to take a chance on it. If I don't need it, I'll turn it off.
Yep. Yeah, it depends what I'm chasing. If I'm chasing something like mulloway,
Yep.
you got to be wearing the right color underwear. You got to woken up on the right side of bed. Everything's got to be done correctly, whether it affects it or not. It's got to be done a
You,
certain way. I've had to,
You're
etc.
only going to
etc.
be wearing a size 8 hat and standing on the left foot. Yep.
That's right.
Yeah.
The first leader knot must be tied properly and not having to be retied twice. Otherwise, I might not even bother with the session, etc. etc. Just all
Yeah.
these
Yeah. And
things
if you've
that,
eaten a
but
banana in the last 3 weeks, you're never going to catch one.
that's right, Greg. But if I'm going for a flathead flick or a kingfish bash, it doesn't really matter. I know that sound may not necessarily spook them. It might actually raise their curiosity, especially
Yeah.
kingfish might come in and have a look. They don't mind a bit of movement and commotion in the water.
Yeah.
So
And look, I used to fish shallow reefs in southeast Queensland years ago for snapper. And if you dropped a sinker in the boat, or you dropped it, you banged a lure against the side of the boat, that was it. This is 4 or 5 meters of water, the snapper were gone. And you have to move on to a new spot. But I spoke to, on the lure fishing podcast, I spoke to a bloke by the name of Alan Bevan a while back, who fishes over in Western Australia. He's a guide, takes clients out fishing for snapper. They get 10, 15 kilo snapper, would you believe? And he goes out on the shallow reefs and he gets out to where he's going to fish and he leans over the side of the boat and he bangs his hand on the hull several times.
yep,
And that actually attracts a snapper in. And what the reason behind that is that in that part of the world, the cray fishermen go out, they pull their cray pots up, the cray pots are banging and clattering against the side of the boat, they take out the old bait, throw it over the side, the snapper are feeding on the old bait. And so he's actually mimicking a cray fishing
wow,
boat by banging on the side of his hull and attracting the snapper in, where in any other part of the world that I know, that would repel the fish, for miles. So it's horses for courses. There's always exceptions to the rule. There's never firm answers, unfortunately.
yeah. I have a similar story to that. So I like to fish boat ramps with bait sometimes, and any time you hear the motor getting put on, when they turn it on or turn it off when they're retrieving or launching their boat, you see all these brim just swim out under the pontoon to have a look in the wash,
Yep.
because most of the time when you're finishing your session, you're dumping your prawns and your pilchards back into the water at the boat ramp or whatever else you've got. You've filleted your fish, carcasses get thrown, the fish
Yep.
come in for a frenzy, and without fail, every time you hear the motor getting turned on, they come out of the shadows, and so that's
Yep.
kind of like that situation with a snapper.
Yeah. Yeah. And another good example, I did some work with fisheries in Queensland quite a few years ago now on Queensland lungfish. and they were using their electrofishing boat to catch lungfish and tag them and all sorts of things. And they found that you could see these lungfish in the system. They found that they could launch a boat, no problems at all, and didn't spook the fish, except their electrofishing boat. Their electrofishing boat, once the lungfish had been caught by that boat, they recognised the motor, and as soon as they started the motor, the fish were gone. So they definitely can recognise and remember stuff. So Johnny Cash, eh? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the guide I knew was using ACDC, and he reckoned he swore by that, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah. Now, I would like to talk about fish and their memory, but before we do that, there's another funny comment here from Ioanni who says, caught 103 centimeter flathead with KFC chicken at Parramatta River.
I hope you bought a lottery ticket at the same time, mate. That's a pretty cool catch. I saw in Tasmania years ago a whole bunch of very big flathead, king flathead there, and they would have been 80 to 90 centimeter fish all caught on chicken drumsticks. So yeah.
Wow.
Just chunks of chicken. A plastic worm, it has a vibration signature. So soft plastics, generally speaking, they don't make a lot of noise, but they have a vibration. So when we talked about those vortices, they'll certainly recognise that. So yeah, not so much a sound, but definitely a vibration.
Yeah, so basically for different lure types with different tails, they have their unique signature, and that's, I guess, the fish can differentiate.
These fish, the lateral lines of these fish is just so incredibly sensitive that, like I said, bait fish can swim in a school and all turn in unison because they instantly recognise that the fish next to them is turning left, so I've got to turn left. They are incredibly sensitive. So, yeah, they'll recognise the sound signature, vibration signature of various lures, no problems whatsoever.
Now, we'll answer this quick question before we talk about fish memory. Aaron says, "Hey Shroom, what are the best lures for bass fishing during summer?" I like to use cicadas, especially wild bass, because especially mega bass cicadas, when you cast and you end up hooking a tree branch, you can retrieve them. You can just flick them back over. That's what I like to use. What about you, Greg?
Well, I'm not much of a bass fisher. There's not too many bass up here, mate, in far north Queensland.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but back in the day, I used to fish with little floating stick baits. Most of my bass fishing, just to be clear, most of my bass fishing was wild river bass in fairly skinny water. So I used to flick little handmade stick baits around under structure and work those. So that's my favourite.
Yeah, definitely surface when it comes to little creeks.
Yep.
You're always going to snag onto tree branches and in between crevices, but if you just have that surface presentation, and especially if, like I said, the lures that I use, you can retrieve them if you hook onto a tree branch, you just cast a little bit too far. That's the way to go for me. Obviously, you got to beef up your leader, like 12, 14 pound. It can be some rough stuff there.
Hey, can I throw a challenge out to your listeners, Shroom?
Oh, absolutely, Greg.
Yeah, okay. So I've been, over the last couple of months, I've been absolutely braining. I noticed someone asked earlier on about mangrove jacks, so Braden's Fishing World. So any tips on catching mangrove jacks? Yeah, go to the local tackle store. You've got your own tackle store by the looks of you. So get yourself some Z-Man goats. Now, if you haven't seen them, they're like a slender version of a frog with a couple of big, flat paddle tails, really skinny little legs on them. I've been absolutely braining the mangrove jacks on the Z-Man goat, and I've looked at the little Z-Man baby goat, which is a much smaller lure, and I thought that would have to kill the bass. It would have to slay them. So I fish these lures typically on an unweighted worm hook, and I can skip them way, way, way back under the mangroves, which is exactly what you need to do for bass as well in the river system. So I'm throwing out the challenge for one of your viewers to grab themselves a couple of packs of Z-Man baby goats and let me know how they go on the bass, because I've been super impressed with them for the mangrove jack, and I reckon they'd be deadly.
Yeah, and also just going in according to the discussion about colours earlier, black being the colour of choice.
Well, they don't have a Z-Man goat in black. I tell you what, when I was a uni student, Shroom, I used to, because at that stage you couldn't buy black lures, and so I'd go and buy whatever colour I could, and then I'd sit there at night with an indelible marker pen colouring them in to make them black. Right. So, but interesting story. Laurie Rapala used to go out and fish with a lot of his competitors' lures to find out, sort of whether they worked or not. And he went out with a fishing journalist on the trip, and the first thing this guy noticed was he had so many competitors' lures there. The next thing he noticed was he had a whole bunch of black rapalas in his box. And he said, "Hey, Laurie, what's the deal with these black rapalas?" And Laurie said, "They are incredibly effective on catching fish." And the guy said, "Well, how come I can't buy any?" And Laurie said, "Well, I have the factory make them for me especially because no one buys black lures." He said, "So we don't make them to sell." He said, "We just make them for me." So there you go. If it works for Laurie, it works for me.
Yeah, I have a similar story. In fact, I met someone along the Parramatta River many years ago. He's a close friend now, and he came from, I think he came from Yorkshire in the UK, and he just started lure fishing in Sydney, and obviously just arrived on our shores and didn't really know how to go about it. Just he only knew everything about carp and trout fishing is what they do back up there, and he had a bunch of these cheap hard bodies, and he just used the texter and he just colored them all in black.
Yep.
And the same thing when you said that they looked in you looked into the guy's tackle box and everything's black. I had the same, like, that image just popped up in my head, just being along the banks of the Parramatta River and looking at it and saying, all right, I know what your favorite color is. I know what like everything's black. You're wearing black. Your lures are black. Your rod's black.
I'll tell you another, just to go back to the Z-Bag goats, I'll tell you another story, mate, is that I can't remember what their colours are called now. I've been using a reddy orangey colour one, but that's only because they've been hard to get, and that was the only colour I could get. But I've actually all of the Z-Man goats are dark on top and lighter underneath, and I rig them upside down quite often so that they're dark, and I'm fishing them on unweighted hooks, so I'm basically skipping them under the structure and then burning them back out, so they're going straight across the surface, but I want the dark surface facing down. So there's another tip for anyone that wants to give those a go.
Yeah, so that would produce a better silhouette. So obviously they do that to mimic natural counter shading, so when a fish looks up, it's light, and so they can't really pick out the lure. And then when they're looking from the top, the birds can't pick out that there's a bait down because it's dark. But obviously, if you just flip that gives them a better chance to, see that contrast in the sky, from the fish looking from below. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. That's a good tip for everyone. I might actually go get some of those baby goats as well. So S Factor, Gulp Gel Scent, which are baby goats.
I've got to start talking to people about getting commissions here.
Yeah.
Hey, Ian Burtonshaw has asked a question. Do you mind if I answer that? What about timber? This is one of my passions, is hand carving timber lures. So Ian's asked what timber I use for carving lures. So I use lots of them, mate. It depends on what types of lures I'm carving, but generally for floating lures, I like to use either Western red cedar or jelliatong. I can't remember if there's another name for jelliatong. It's a type of native pine, I think. But anyway, they're the timbers that I use for floating lures and for diving minnows. And if I'm doing, I'll use balsa quite a bit too, but it's a little bit softer, of course. So I tend to impregnate that with resin to make it a bit harder so that it can stand the kinds of fish that we catch up here. But interestingly, if I want to make a sinking lure, I want to make one that suspends, I'll go for a lighter timber, and then I'll put more weight in it because it stabilizes it. So there's the short answer. But don't be restricted to just one timber.
Yeah, I don't know too much about lure making, so I've got no contribution there.
We've got to get you started. I tell you, if you reckon catching a fish on a bought lure is a buzz, try catching one on a lure you've made yourself. It's a real hoot.
Yeah, I think that's got to be one of the most rewarding things. I mean, I don't know what percentage of anglers end up creating their own lures. I guess if you fish flies, you might tie your own, but that's completely different to sanding down, getting a piece of wood, and designing something that's unique to what you can envision as a good lure for your preferred species and color, and adding all the
you can certainly, I mean,
components.
I've done fly tying as well, and you can certainly, there's some flies that are very difficult and very challenging to tie, there's no doubt about it, but you can knock out dozens of flies in an evening if you get going, whereas lures, there's a fair bit more work and a lot more unknowns. There's a lot more chance that they're not going to work when you actually put them in the water. So it's a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more hit and miss, but it's definitely worth the effort.
Now, Daniel's got a question here. I don't know whether this is within the scope of what we can, give a definitive answer to, but he's saying that, the wave action slapping the hull, does that have any influence on, kingfish hanging around, or say being turned on for the bite, for
Yeah,
example?
look, I mean, possibly. It's a bit hard to say without a bit more context. But let me tell you something about kingfish. They are so sensitive to vibration and to sound. Um, they can detect from nearly 100 meters away, they can detect the chain on a wave rider buoy or a fad, right? But they can detect it not only down current, where you get the turbulence, they can detect it from the sides, right? So they are extremely sensitive to vibration and sound. So look, are the waves slapping on a tender or a tinny, are they attracting them? Well, possibly, I don't know, but I can tell you they're super sensitive to sound. And that's why if you love your kingfish and you're going to be fishing with stick baits, for example, you want some noisy ones, you want some quiet ones. You want some poppers that are going to throw lots of spray, and then you want some stick baits that are going to be a little bit more subtle and maybe work just below the surface, because they're super sensitive to vibration, and sometimes it's going to attract them and other times it's going to repel them.
Yeah. What about your thoughts on the Hydra wave? Now I've just thought up of that. That's got to be some new electro. Well, it's not new anymore. It's been around for a while, but I remember when it
It's been
first.
been around for 15 years or so. Yeah. Look, let me firstly say that I've never actually used one, but I know and trust a whole bunch of people who I've worked closely with who do use them, and who swear by them. And look, like we've just talked about the importance of sound, and how that can switch fish on or switch them off. And there's no doubt, and I've seen plenty of evidence that in the right circumstances, a hydro wave can definitely turn fish on. And I know Jason Wilhelm, who I've done a fair bit of work with, he was involved in helping to develop the Aussie sounds for the hydro wave. So, when they first came out in the US, they were the sounds that they made were very much attuned to US bait species and that sort of thing. So they then developed Australian ones as well. And Jason was a sonographer in the Navy, and he does all kinds of underwater sound stuff, as well as not sonographer. What do you call it? Anyway, he did sonar. He was looking for submarines in the Navy, but he also
Yep.
did a lot of acoustic stuff as well. And so he's very well attuned to that, and he'll tell you that they definitely work. Yeah.
Yeah, I might get one day then if I get a boat. I've always had that question at the back of
Look,
my mind, how effective
it,
these hydro waves were.
yeah, I think you talk to any tournament angler. Um, it's one of those things. It's not going to guarantee you fish every time, but it's one of those things that it's one of those 1% things that can make a difference at times, and can definitely work.
Yep. All right, so I think that's all the questions about sound. Now, getting on to fish and their memory, what they can remember. We all know the joke that a goldfish has what is it, a 3-second memory, swimming around the bowl, swims
Yeah,
around the ornament once.
you want to know the truth about goldfish? That 3-second memory thing, that theory was developed by a whole bunch of goldfish owners who didn't want to own up to just how bored their pets are. Right? Goldfish have pretty good memories. I read somewhere, it must be true because I read it somewhere, but I did read somewhere that goldfish can actually recognise a human face, for 6 months after they've seen it. And obviously, fish they recognise when
When
people
it's
who feed
feeding
them, they
time,
recognise those people all the
they know
time.
when you're about to feed them, so they can remember the
But
last time they were fed at the minimum.
one of the biggest disappointments about having an aquarium is you want the fish to swim around looking natural, but every time you walk past, they all swim up to the glass because they're waiting to be fed. So they definitely remember. Look, like every animal, fish don't have the same mental capacity as human beings. Let's face it. They tend to be mostly instinctive animals. But like every animal, if you can't learn and retain information, you're not going to be around for long. Evolution's going to show you the back door pretty quickly. So fish do remember, and fish communicate with each other. So they recognise sounds, they recognise vibrations, and one of them, has been caught on that lure before. It sends out a body language, so the signal to the other fish in the school, don't eat this thing, right?
Yep.
And vice versa if they're turned on by it. So, but they definitely do remember. And if you look at any hard fish waterway, they recognise certain lures, the more common lures. This is why we have this evolution of lures. Every year there's new lures come out because the fish do remember them. And if you go back to ones that were used 15 years ago, they're effective again now. But you talk to people, and to give another example, the jackal chubby is one that a lot of brim fishers use. I know a lot of tournament guys say, no, it's too many brim recognise that lure now. It's been too commonly used. You need to use something else, that's got a different sound, different vibration. So, they definitely they've got much better memories than we give them credit for.
I agree when it comes to when a new lure type, a unique lure type hits the market. It's extremely effective in that first period where everyone's catching absolutely everything. But once they get attuned to it, to the environment, they've been thrown, for the last season or two, then they're still a good lure, but they're just not, they don't have that X factor anymore. Yeah. And that's with every single lure that I've seen. And it's always, so I always think to myself, if I throw a lure, do I want to be throwing what the guy was throwing early in the morning or last night or yesterday afternoon? I want to be using something a little bit different. And if you're not getting the bite with a particular lure, just keep changing and changing and changing. Yeah. There's something there that might pique their interest at some stage, because I haven't seen it.
I'll tell you what, Shroom, start making your own, because then you can have different sounds, different vibrations, different looking lures. Fish can't get used to those. They can't get to know them.
Yeah, that's right. Especially if you make your own unique lures, the only person that throws them is yourself. So
it's yourself. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So regular on my channel, Stewie, he started making soft plastics recently, and he made every shade of natural under the sun, basically every single reddish, brownish, greenish, purplish. And I mean, it was a bit of a challenge just using which particular shade of brown that we wanted to use, but I mean, it felt good to have all those options. And I'm sure, that's the kind of thing you're talking about, just getting that unique color. It's not everyone's throwing the same motor oil Z-Man grub, the same squidgy silver fox, the same et cetera color, nuclear chicken, Berkeley 5-inch gulp jerk shad. They've seen it about every Saturday, Sunday, in Botany Bay, for example. Something a little bit different turns them on. But yeah, that unique shape, definitely I've noticed that with any lure type. So the next time a unique shape enters the market, especially to the people listening now, just take a note of how effective it is for the first period. And if you want, obviously capitalize on that, but then understand that it's not going to be like that forever.
Kind of wish I hadn't mentioned that Z-Man goat now.
Yeah, that's right. Here are some of the lures that I've thought about. Like the cranker crab when it came out, the Eco Gear brim prawn, the Eco Gear, what is it called? The ZX, I think the ZX shrimp, the unique shape that, you've got so many copies of it now. That's the reason why they're so effective. When they came out, they were just slaying the fish in every situation in the water.
Yep, and that's right. And they work for a while, and then the fish start to get used to them. And likewise, if you've ever been involved with charter businesses, they'll go out and they'll look for new ground, and for a while, that new ground fishes unbelievably well. And then after a season or two, it's not as good as it used to be. You've got to go and find new ground because the fish have become a little bit wiser to the lures, and they recognise that there's a boat around, and it's just natural. And if fish couldn't do that, they couldn't remember, then like I say, they'd disappear a lot quicker. Evolution would show them the back door.
Yeah. Now Nick says, I fished with Morgo and Hickson with Hydrowave, and turning them on versus off can be a 1% difference. That's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
It's like the cherry on top. It's not going to be the reason why you didn't catch a fish that day.
No, but it may make enough of a difference, and certainly in a tournament situation. I know Nick fishes tournaments as well, so in a tournament situation that can be really important. So,
I think Nicholas Cook says fish seem to remember more. The idea, hence going to the tackle shop every week to replenish and get new lures.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with that whatsoever. In fact, you may as well just get your pay paid directly into the tackle shop's account, and then you can just go in and choose what you want every week.
Yep. Now, on from memory, let's see. So we've got another question here, which is fish and their sleeping patterns. Now, obviously, the first thing that comes to most people's minds are obviously fish probably do sleep, but would they drown, or what's going on there?
Well, every animal sleeps. Yeah, fish definitely sleep. Every animal sleeps. No, they don't drown. And I'm not sure. I think some fish have the ability to sleep while they're still moving. And certainly some marine mammals do. I mean, look at whales, for example. They can shut off half their brain, and half of their brain is sleeping while the other half's navigating. So they keep moving and they keep swimming. They don't sink to the bottom and drown. So they definitely have, they've evolved mechanisms for getting sleep. Fish definitely sleep, and people don't necessarily recognise this, and they say, "Oh, the fish are shut down." Well, once a fish is fed, a bit like a human being, if I have a big feed, first thing I want to do is
KFC.
be on the couch and have a snooze, right? So I didn't have a big feed before we did this live stream because I needed to stay awake. So the fish are the same. So once they've had a big feed, then they go into needing to digest that food, right? So they're not going to keep feeding once they've got a stomach full. They're going to go off. They're going to find somewhere to relax until that full stomach starts to feel a little bit less full, and then they start to get active again. And so you'll see quite often, and I'm going to use jewfish as an example here. People say, "Oh, there's always dewies around the bridge pylons. They get down deep during the day. They're hard to catch. But when they come up on the flats, well, that's because they're feeding up on the flats and then they're retreating back to the bridge pylons. This doesn't always happen. You can catch dewies around the pylons as well, of course. But quite often that's what they're doing. When they go down deep and they're not feeding, they're digesting or they're sleeping. And so then you've got to find some other way. And this is the other mistake I think a lot of lure fishers make, is that they assume that fish always eat a lure because they're hungry, right? But not always. You can trigger a bite from a fish that's not hungry, and that's what you need to do if they're in that kind of sleeping mode. You need to wake up. And this happens a lot with native fish, for example. You've got to rattle a lure through the snag. They've seen it the first time, but you've got to rattle it through the snag 15, 20, 30 times, however many times it takes to be able to get that fish to bite out of annoyance rather than out of hunger. And that can happen with a lot of species. So, yeah, fish definitely sleep. No two ways about it.
Yeah, that's a good point about fish attacking lures irrespective of the need to feed, and that could be out of aggression or being territorial. Just dropping a lure on top of a bass's head, that's its home. You're knocking on the front door, really, and it may not want you there in its space, and it'll attack you out of aggression,
Yeah.
attack your lure, attack that baby goat, which you can skip right under there into its home.
No, we forget about the goats. Remember, I don't want everyone to
Yeah,
know about them. Yeah, but I mean, you think about yourself. If you're asleep and somebody wakes you up, you're going to have one of two reactions, aren't you? You're either going to wake up, with a start, or you're going to wake up and smack the person who's just woken you up. You're either going to be aggressive or you're going to be startled. And fish
yeah,
are the same. So you need to be able to wake them up and get them to the point, trigger them to take a lure for some other reason other than hunger.
yeah. Now, I mean, I don't know how much we know about fish's sleep patterns, what part of the day or how long they sleep for. I mean, they probably don't completely switch off, like in the mammals sense, how you said, maybe dolphins or whales, half their brain is shut off. So they're still, obviously, they need to, they're a bit different. They need to actually come out to the surface and take a a breath of oxygen, but a fish has gills, but it still needs to breathe in
Hmm.
that sense. Um, like I'm just trying to think of a reason, a question someone might ask would be, at night if they're sleeping, how could you catch them? I mean, do they sleep specifically at night? I've heard of fish being nocturnal, for example. I mean, they fish any time of day. I've saw
Look,
fish
I mean,
like sleep any time of day, for example, like along the bridge pylons, for example, Mulloway, like you said, they could be just resting there.
yeah, I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that question, Shroom. And I think, probably varies between species. When we talk about nocturnal species, we're probably not talking about whether they sleep at night. We're talking about whether they feed at night. So, nocturnal species are the ones who are out there hunting at night. Now, even hunting fish, they're not going to keep feeding all night. Once they've got their fill, they're going to then go off and digest that food, right? Now, that's not to say that there's this theory that all the fish come and bite at once, and then on the tide change or whatever it is, then they all go off and do whatever they do. But the reality is that most of the time there's fish around that are feeding. There's more feeding at certain times and there's less feeding at other times. But I suspect they sleep when they've eaten, And so if you're talking about periods when you might have a full moon, for example, it can be really bright right through the night. Often, a lot of species will feed right through the night. I suspect they then sleep during the day. Other times they might feed during the day and sleep at night. I don't think they have, and this is, I don't know for sure. This is kind of my theory on it, but I suspect they don't have routine sleeping patterns like human beings do. And if you look at most animals, if I give my dog a feed in the middle of the day, it's going to go and have a sleep mid-afternoon. Most animals, when they've had a feed, are going to then relax a little bit afterwards and let that food digest. So I think it just depends, because fish they're so driven by tide, they're so driven by weather, they're so driven by conditions, and they're opportunistic feeders. So if the sleep follows the feed, then that feed can happen any time of the day or night, depending on those factors and how they come together.
Yeah, that's
Does that
a
make sense?
great point. Yeah, like say for humans, I think they did a study on human sleep patterns, and they said that if you just left humans to just live out their day without any responsibilities, I think people were sleeping. They started sleeping at around the evening hours, but they'd wake up halfway through the night,
Mm.
and then I think all the subjects just pretty much just did whatever they wanted for like the next several hours being awake, and then they went back to sleep in the early hours of the morning. And so that seemed to be the pattern. Like I've noticed it with myself too, that if I'm going to wake up at night, I'll generally wake up halfway through and then go back to bed. And so I don't know whether that's some kind of a some kind of a relic from our past in how humans used to be, ancient humans. And that's just like I know humans don't have very good night vision. So in other words, we're not made to hunt or survive at night. We just have to basically crawl in our little holes and survive the night and wake up early in the morning and forage, for example. And that's maybe why we wake up, in those early hours of the morning. But for fish, they can sense lures, they can hit lures at night and all that. So they've got that nocturnal. You've got nocturnal fish, you've got fish that are active in the day. So that does make sense to me in the way that they've also got that influence of changing conditions. We've just got sunlight basically dictating our day, but they've got that tide
Yep.
that dictates where they can be at any time, or when the most opportune period to feed is. Whereas for us, this I'm just talking about. I mean, I could be completely off here, but ancient humans would be foraging in the early hours. Being warm-blooded, we can be active during that period before the predators would wake up and the lion would grab us. For example, not
Yep.
that just as a complete exaggeration, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But and if you think about, it probably varies a fair bit between species. But if you think about bait fish, they're probably not going to want to sleep at night, right? Unless they're tucked away in a cave somewhere, because the moment you're not focused, you're easy pickings. So they're more likely to sleep during the day, I would suspect. I mean, the underwater world's a pretty rugged environment when you think about it. I think I heard somewhere that 98% of things that die in the ocean die a violent death. Very few things grow old and die of old age. They either get sick and die, or they get eaten somewhere along the way. So, you're not going to be able to completely shut down if you're a bait fish species or a smaller fish species, because you're just going to get eaten.
Ian says fish sleeping and moon phases is something that has always fascinated me. Yeah, now moon phases, that's got to be another huge can of worms.
Look, it is. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And we know, how important moon phases are to fish. I mean, you look at Queensland, for example. We have a couple of weekends a year where the finfish fishery is closed. You can't go out and catch reef fish because it's a full moon and they're going to be spawning at that time of year in spring. So we know that whole ecosystems are driven by moon phases. How it affects fish, well, look, it varies tremendously between species, and I wouldn't put it this way. I certainly have moons that I like to fish, and it's more about tidal flow and water movement and water clarity than it is about fish behaviour. But there's no doubt that moon phases do affect fish.
Yeah, I just had a really crazy thought just then. So, like, I know moon phase, like, in my opinion, when it comes to fishing, moon phases isn't a big deal to me as opposed to the actual tides that arise from the phase of the moon. So that to me, obviously, that means that it's not just the moon itself, although it has the biggest impact on our tides.
Hmm.
By far, like more than twice the effect than the sun. But when you mentioned that some fish were breeding on the moon phase, that reminds me of say the Great Barrier Reef, where all the corals might spawn on a
Coral spawn,
specific
yeah,
moon
yeah.
phase,
Hmm.
and it's like I don't know how to predict it, but from every documentary that I've watched, it's just a fascinating thing where everything and anything at the same time releases sperm and spores and
Gamete,
eggs, whatever it is.
yep,
It's all
yep.
huge concoction, and it's just guarantees the survival. And yeah, so that was the crazy thought that just came to my mind.
Yeah.
But that, going back to, yeah, I mean, if you got anything to add to that,
And
yeah.
that coral spawning event is the same weekend as the finfish spawning as well. So, it's a
Oh
couple of
wow.
weekends a year. You can predict them. We already know what the close dates are for next year because it's based on moon phases. It's very, very easy to predict. We can predict them decades ahead. So,
Wow.
yeah. So there's whole systems that are driven by that. And obviously, a lot of estuarine species, for example, feed on prawns. We know that prawns tend to run on
Prawns
the new
running.
moon,
Yep. Yep.
right? And
That's
so
that was an obvious one that didn't even occur to me. Like the prawns
yeah,
running on the new
yeah.
moon.
And look, if you go into freshwater systems, there's a lot of barra fishermen that absolutely swear by, fishing on the full moon for barramundi. That, that whether you're fishing day or night, around the full moon is a peak time. So, the moon definitely has an influence on fish, and even if it's not, through tides. Obviously, in a lake system, it's not tides, but it's still having some effect. So. It definitely drives whole ecosystem. We know, animals behave differently on a full moon as well. So kids go crazy on a full moon, I've got to tell you too. So
They become werewolves.
I don't know about that, but they become uncontrollable. I know that much.
Yeah. Now we'll quickly answer this question because it's come up twice, I think. So Ioanni says, "What's the reason why Jewfish don't take fresh, dead squid, but always take live squid where I fish?"
Well, that's a really good question. And I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer, but let me give you a theory. Is that when you've got a live animal of any kind, there's muscles movement going on, and fish can often sense the little electric currents that occur in the muscles of the bait that they're eating. So they can detect that. They can tell that a squid's live. If it's dead, and it's fresh, well, they don't know how fresh it is. Most fish, I don't think, sort of smell something and go, oh, that's 3 days old. I'm not going to eat that. But certainly if it's live, they can detect that it's live. And I think most predatory fish prefer to eat something that's still alive than to eat something that's dead. So that's my theory. I don't know if
Yeah,
it's correct.
I always put live bait ahead of dead bait because most top of the food chain predators, they're hunting.
Yeah.
They're not scavengers, per se. They're definitely not looking to just feed on dead things. They are right at the top of the triangle, so
Yep.
they're watching their food swim by 24/7. It's their job in
But
the food chain to basically just select out the weakest individuals that are live. They're not, like when you see a shark take a bite out of your catch, it rarely takes your whole snapper. It just takes half of it, and that other half, what happens? It just feeds the rest of the food chain.
it takes the half that you want. That's the problem.
Yeah, you end up with the head and the skeleton, the
Yeah.
bones.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I see Drunken Sailor there said, they take, Jewies take fresh squid where he fishes. Yeah, look, they do. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I'd certainly, if I didn't have live squid, I'd fish dead squid. But personally, I'd fish lures, to be honest. But
Yeah, I think dead squid is a fantastic bait, especially if it's local, fresh and dead. But like you said, live is always best. It's just hard to get live squid.
not the supermarket stuff though, please, guys. Don't use the supermarket squid.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely not supermarket squid. If we're talking about you've just caught it on the wharf, and you've just sent it out, and it's ended up dying in the process, that's fresh dead. Not fresh
Yep.
dead off the market, or I mean, even the ones in the tackle shop, the Hawkesbury squid, that's okay, but that's not the same as if you just caught it and it's dead for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The reason I say not to use supermarket, and this goes for any bait, not to use supermarket stuff, is so much of it's imported.
It's like
And there have
parasites
been
and
instances, disease has been brought in. So the white spot disease in southeast Queensland a couple of years ago, and the prawn
Venomite
industry
prawns.
got smashed. Yeah, that was because they suspect because of prawns being used for bait that have come in from Vietnam or somewhere. So just keep in mind that supermarket stuff can bring in imported supermarket stuff can bring in disease. So.
Now, before we get to the last point, here's a funny comment from Nicholas again. I think he's come up with a few funny ones. He sees a market for mulloway poop. Maybe there is something going on here.
I know a guy who was selling crap on eBay at one stage, and what he was basically doing was he was going out and collecting koala crap and possum crap and all sorts of stuff, and then he was setting it in resin and selling it to, I don't know who was buying the stuff, but it was because somebody had told him he had a bet that he could sell shit on eBay, and so that's what they did.
Yeah. Now we'll just deal with one last point here to finish off the show, and that is, communication. Fish, relating to their brains and their mentality, their
Mm.
communication, their ability to learn things and teach each other things, or is it just purely instinctual? Like over time, when you fish a system, the fish get shut down. So obviously something's changing. They're either communicating, or they're learning, or they're evolving. Obviously, on a short time scale, they can't be evolving.
Not on a short time scale, but they certainly. I mean, we've already kind of touched a little bit on some of this in some of the other things we've talked about. So, memory and learning is definitely part of it. But again, we assume that because mostly our communication's verbal, right? We assume that because fish can't speak in words, don't have a language, that they don't communicate. But in fact, they can communicate really, really well via body language, and they do make sounds as well. So, if you were to sit out on a river system or sit out in the bay and drop a hydrophone over the side, which is basically an underwater microphone, the amount of sounds that you can hear is phenomenal. And so lots of species, and we'll go back to jewfish again, they call them croakers for a reason. They actually make a sound and they can communicate via sound. So they use sounds that they make, swim bladder sounds, croaking sounds, all sorts of things, teeth grinding in some cases, to communicate with each other. They use body language to communicate with each other as well. And of course, then there's
Yep.
things like pheromones and that sort of stuff as well. So lots of different ways that they can communicate. It's just that it's not verbal. And so, like I say, you can be fishing a school of bass for ages and not get a fish, and then the instant you get one fish, you excite one fish, then the whole school starts to get excited, and that happens with lots of different species. And it also happens the other way around, that you throw that fish back and it goes down, it's scared, it goes down, and the other fish in the school read its body language, and suddenly the whole school shuts down. So that can happen too. And it happens again to various degrees with various species, but there's definitely communication that goes on. It's not a verbal communication, not a language.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, Greg? Because I really appreciate the time that you put into tonight's show. I don't want to keep you too long past the 2 hour mark, because it is
Like
tough being live
you,
for that long.
you're worried I'm going to turn into a pumpkin, no? No, actually, a really good question that's just come up from Drunken Sailor, um, saying that fish don't feel pain. Can I talk a bit more about that? So let me clarify a little bit. Fish do feel pain. Okay, so for example, I'm not a great fan of tagging fish because I don't think it's necessarily in the fish's best interest. I know they survive if it's done well, and I know that you can recapture them and you can get some good information. When I'm talking about fish not feeling pain so much, I'm talking about their digestive systems, their digestive tract. So if you think about, if we were to eat, pick up a prawn and eat the head of the prawn, it's spiky and it's sharp, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt your mouth, it's going to hurt your digestive system. But fish eat those things all the time. Right, so in their mouths are largely bone and cartilage. There's not a lot of nerve endings in their mouths. And throughout their digestive system, it's all basically set up to be able to eat sharp things, to eat prawn heads, to eat oyster shells, to eat spiky bait fish. They do that all the time. And if they do get injured, they recover very quickly. So this is why if you catch a fish and release it, and you handle it properly, it's got a really good chance of surviving. So I don't think they feel pain so much in their mouths because there aren't those nerve endings there, and because their mouths are designed to be able to eat sharp things, which means they're not going to feel the hooks terribly much. What they feel, though, of course, is the line pulling them in the opposite direction to what they want to go. And in terms of survival rates, it's not actually the hooks that do the damage, it's the handling of the fish once you get it to the boat. So holding it properly, keeping it wet, keeping it in a net while you get your camera ready, all that kind of stuff, so that you can release it well. Most of the fish that die, most of the release fish that die, are not dying because of the hooks, they're dying because of the way they're handled when they're caught.
Right. I'm glad that Drunken Sailor brought up that question, because now I've just got a bunch of new thoughts relating to that. I mean, if you've ever caught small bait fish, right, like yakkers, and you've just tried to grab one, How painful is that? How painful is grabbing and getting a handful of anal fin or whatever, pectoral fin, just spiking you everywhere?
Dorsal fins, yep, yep.
And these fish, they get eaten alive head first, and so if it needs to swim backwards, it's all those spikes are going through the digestive system, but they can obviously take that. So they most certainly wouldn't feel any form of discomfort from
No.
ingesting live fish, which is what they do half the time. The fish gets ingested live head first. It's kicking in its mouth and in its digestive cavities, and they're not chewing it up either. So they're not making it more manageable. It's just going straight down. If their mouth can get around it, that's going in, if that makes sense.
Well,
It's
some
not
fish
going
chew them up.
back
I
out.
mean,
Yeah.
mackerel and the like, they'll snip fish in half, tailor. Other species like your jewfish and those sorts of species, they're implosion feeders, so they swallow them whole. But look, on the whole, most fish species, they can eat crabs, they can eat prawns, they can eat, all kinds of bait fish, spiky or not, and it doesn't do them any harm because their digestive system is set up and evolved to be able to handle that. So a hook in the mouth, that's not going to hurt them too much. Obviously, a hook down deeper in the gut, that can do a bit more damage. Which is one of the reasons why I like lure fishing, that you generally hook them in the mouth and they're easy to release and have a good chance of surviving.
Now, about pain on the surface of the fish on the outside, I mean, is there a way to know to what degree that may be? Is it true strong pain, or is it just a sensation that something's there on the outside? Do they have many pain receptors? I mean, most of the time, fish. Yep. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I don't know the full answer to that question, Shroom, but let me just say this. I can't think of an animal that doesn't feel pain if you pierce its skin. You think of any animal, if you pierce its skin, it's going to hurt, right? And I can't see any reason why fish would be any different. I think if you're damaging them by piercing the skin, they're going to feel pain. To what extent they feel that pain, I don't know. I don't think anyone does know. And obviously, a lot of people who like fishing live baits will say it's probably not too bad, and a lot of people who work for PETA and others might say that it's a terrible, cruel thing to do. I suspect they probably don't feel pain to the same extent as humans, but that's just my theory. I don't really know. I suspect around the mouth there's a lot less nerve endings there. It's more cartilage and bone and that kind of stuff. They probably don't feel it as much there, but on the body, I reckon they probably do. And fins, like you touch a fish on the fin, they're incredibly sensitive. I reckon they'd certainly feel it there.
Yeah. All right, guys. Do you have any questions? Drop it down in the comments section. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about? Anything else that you would like to talk about, Greg? I mean, I don't want to take up too much of your time past the 2-hour mark.
I'm not in a hurry. If people have got questions, I'm happy to stick around. But yeah, John's saying I'd make a good vegan. I'm not so sure about that, John. I'm very much a carnivore, I have to say. So I don't think I'd make a very good vegan at all.
Ian Bertershaw says anything that is live is sending out signals. So that's just going on with that's just that discussion earlier about the live versus the dead squid debate.
Yep.
Oh, Djan's got a question. Djan says, what size reel would you use for jewfish off the beach? Do you do much beach fishing, Greg?
No, look, I don't. The beaches up here are very different, of course, to the beaches in your part of the world. So our beaches, we're fishing for barra and those sorts of things. So very, very, very different to fishing for dewies, and there's no surf. We do have stingers, and we have crocodiles, and we have a few other things to keep us alert and interested. But I don't. Yeah, I used to fish for dewies off the beach years and years and years ago. But oh man, I was a kid. It was back in the Jurassic period.
Ali Muhammad says, Shroom, what's your best lure? I mean, it depends on what I'm catching, but I'll name 3 fish: flathead, jewfish, and brim. For brim, I like to use the Z-Man grubs in watermelon red 2.5 inch. For mulloway, I like to use the 80mm squidgy fish in silver fox color. And for flathead, I like to use the Berkeley Gulp jerk shad in nuclear chicken, 5 inch in length. Drunken Sailor says, I'll have to ask Now I'm not aware of this person, but you may be, Greg. Jordan Peterson, when fish evolved pain receptors, maybe he knows about fish and lobsters.
Yeah,
Do you have
I
any
don't know
thoughts on that?
Jordan, but if you get some information, mate, I would love to hear it. I love that sort of stuff. Ben Diggles is also a very, very good source of information for that kind of stuff too. So
Yeah, I don't know who Jordan is. I when I heard that name, I was thinking, oh, maybe it's someone like a Jacques Cousteau or one of those really famous divers of some sort or researchers. Okay, what Ali's got another question for me. He says, Shroom, what's a good spot for kingfish? Right now, anywhere east of the Harbour Bridge in the Parramatta River system, Sydney Harbour system, Botany Bay, you're looking at Dolls Point through to Kiama, all along the western side of Botany Bay. And if you can get out on a boat, get down to Molly Point, because this is the time. If you want a kingfish, that's where I would be if I could get back out on a boat.
I'll tell you when to catch them as well, Shroom. Best time to catch them.
Yep.
It's the day before you get there or an hour after you leave.
Oh yes, that's true. Yeah. I think with kingfish, you certainly want to get there early. It's one of those species that you have a lot more luck when you're targeting them in the early hours of the morning, first light and just a little bit past that point. The early morning is always good. I think once the sun starts to pick up, they're on the move. They're really picky. They can be finicky. They can be cruising anywhere in the system, all the way up the river. It's like finding where's Wally. It's just it's tough sometimes. So if people are really trying really hard to tick off a kingfish this season, my best advice is get out there as early as you can. Before that wind picks up, that's the best time. You can have a lot of success before they start to become finicky throughout the day. I feel like once that sun starts to go up high in the sky, yeah, you don't have a chance. They're not hungry anymore. They fed all morning and they're just roaming, being top predators. They don't have to eat. They can just watch prey swim by the whole time. And once every while, they might decide to eat, but other than that, you're going to find it really tough tempting them. What's this one? Andrew Shong says, have you ever been to Brisbane to fish? Okay, well, for me, no, I haven't. Oh, yeah, Brisbane? No. Brisbane City? No. Also, tips for fishing whiting, like seasons and months. Love the videos. Keep it up. I'm not too much of a whiting fisherman, but I find that in the warmer months, in the shallow flats, the mud flats of the Georges River, and at night along the harbour, just anywhere where there's like flats, there's plenty of big whiting. What about your experiences, Greg? Do you guys get that up there, or?
Yeah, well, I actually lived in Brisbane for quite a few years, so I've fished that area pretty well. I didn't fish a lot for whiting, I have to say, but yeah, certainly plenty of places there you can catch whiting. In the summer months are definitely the time to fish for them, especially if you like your topwater stuff. But yeah, out on Moreton Bay, Bribey Island, up through any of the estuaries, plenty of whiting there if you're in the Brisbane area.
Yeah, popping for whiting. Yeah, certainly. How could I forget about that? That's certainly something. This is the season. I mean, heading into January, February, I find they're the best months to do it. Yeah, get a few stick baits and just work that top bit of water, keep it moving, and yeah, you'll find that they jockey behind that lure and fight for it. So I mean, the size, you sometimes you have to move around to find the correct size of fish. But if you're at a flatting grounds, you're definitely gonna get a lot of jockeying behind that lure, and it's really exciting. It's just the perfect way to target them, really. I mean, you can almost guarantee that if you work the lure at a specific speed in a specific area, your first catch is going to be a whiting. It's very specific, targeted, and yeah, you don't get too much bycatch, really. Oh, Drunken Sailor says, Jordan Peterson is a must-watch evolutionary psychologist who speaks a lot about lobster research. Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds interesting.
I'll be Googling
Might
that
have
one.
to look that up. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Nick Penpray says Middle Harbour's going off on the brim at the moment. OSP bent minnows and Eco Gear aqua prawns. Yeah, so I really want to get back up to Middle Harbour. Every time I'm there, I'm trying to catch kingfish, but that water clarity there is just insane. Some of those boat ramps there, you can see all the all the brim just congregating in amongst the rocks with all the oysters. And I've never, even though I've been to those places so many times because I've, been getting on and off the boat there, you just wonder just what would happen if you just dropped a bait or a lure in front. It's insane. Middle Harbour, I just love the Middle Harbour. I don't know if you've ever fished that system, have you, Greg?
No, I haven't, but I hope to be fishing it in April. So, sorry,
Oh,
March.
right, yeah.
Yeah,
How long are you going to
yep.
be down here for?
Well, 4 or 5 days, I believe. Yeah.
All right, so not too long. Otherwise, I would maybe try to set something up and get you onto something.
I come down that way occasionally, mate. So yeah, we should catch up at some stage.
Oh, that's good. I
Um,
mean, if you come down and you've got some time, I'd certainly. I mean, the viewers here, I'm sure they want to see something happen here.
Hey, I noticed Nathan earlier on. I don't know if Nathan's still online or not, but he asked a question several times about barramundi fishing around Cairns. Do you get many barramundi around Cairns? Yeah, mate, we do. Um, they're not the easiest to catch around Cairns, but Cairns has a net-free zone that's been in place for about 5 years now, and so the number and the quality of barramundi that have been caught here, and also threadfin salmon in Tomatoes Creek and some of those places, has improved dramatically since the net-free zone's been in place. So definitely plenty, and I've been catching 75 to 80 centimetre barramundi to bycatch while I've been targeting mangrove jacks on a consistent basis. Basically from the Daintree down to Cardwell area. There's plenty of barra around, so yeah, just got to go and find them.
What's your favourite species, Greg?
Mangrove jack are my favourite, but there's so many to choose from up here. It's a difficult one. I mean, I do love chasing barra as well. I'm not an impoundment barra guy. I like the salty barra more, but yeah, mangrove jack are the thing that floats my boat.
Yeah, I still haven't hooked one. I went up to Weeper that one time, and a few friends caught a few, but I wasn't one of the lucky ones. I caught a few barra. That was quite interesting.
Yeah,
It was good to catch that that iconic Australian species up that way and just be in awe of its size and power.
yeah,
Um,
yep. Well, since the net-free zone's been in place in Cairns, we've had metre 20, metre 30 barra and more being caught off the beach by people quite often. So, that's if you like your live baiting, I tend to stick to lures. But if you like your live baiting and you're prepared to, put a bait out on a beach around dusk, yeah, you're in with a good chance of catching some big barra.
Yeah, Nicholas Cook, this is a question for me, but this is going to be interesting. He says, never fished the Georges River, but the famed Georges River special might bring me down that way. Greg, I don't know if you know about that. It's a bit of a running joke in my channel. The Georges River special is what I call a plastic bag
Right.
full of crud. Yeah.
How
So,
do they
I mean,
taste?
it's got to be one of the most polluted systems in Australia, the Georges River. Everyone lives around it. Everyone fishes it. It's basically brown for 3/4 of the waterway. You're catching car parts. You're catching discarded furniture. You're catching plenty of bags, Coles bags, Woolies bags, grey bags, and they're always full of some brown stuff, which I call crap. It's full of crap. So every time I catch one, I say, oh, in my videos, Georges River special,
Yeah, yeah.
the mythical catch. Yeah. But when you come down here, obviously, yeah, hopefully you don't get one of these mythical beasts. They're a bit too
Right.
yeah, they're a bit too special. They got to be
Right.
released. Kai Fisho says tips to crack your first kingfish. I do have a boat. Do you have any tips for Kai, Greg?
Oh, so many. Have a good range of lures that I like surface fishing for them, the lures. So have some poppers, have some stick baits that work near the surface, have some stick baits that go down deeper, and basically go places where you're pretty confident you're going to find fish. So you get. I'm not sure where you're fishing, Kai, but you'll find, talk to the local tackle stores or get online, get a few tips about where to look for them. Find some places where there are some bait kicking around, and be out there early. Fish around dusk, around dawn or around dusk, and work through those 3 lures. So work your surface lures particularly if it's if they're following lures but not taking them, then try your stick baits and go to a floating stick bait and then a sinking stick bait would be my advice. And usually as the day wears on, the sun gets up a bit higher, then you can just stick to your sinking stick baits and fish down a bit deeper. But that's what I would do, and that's how I used to fish from in Moreton Bay.
Yeah. So Kai, I hope that that helps. That helps you in your quest to get
if you need more
kingfish.
information, let me know.
Yeah, I answer those questions almost every stream, so I thought I'd let you answer that one.
Yeah, it's hard to know because there's so much you can say, but yeah.
Yeah. Andrew says, have you guys ever used the Samaki Zing Extreme V2 rods? Was thinking of getting one, but not much reviews about them.
I haven't personally used them, but a number of my podcast guests have used them and swear by them. So I can't say from personal experience, but I've heard some good things.
I probably had a few casts with one. So it's the I think black and white with a camo grip. It felt like a really good plastics fishing rod. Pretty fast action. So I'd say if that's what you want to use it for, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, these days it's not as popular as some of the other rods on the market, but yeah, Samaki make really good rods. I've used some of their higher end stuff as well. Samaki, what's a... Yeah, I've definitely used a lot of their higher end stuff, like $400+ rods, and they've been great. I don't have any currently like in rotation, but yeah, so that they were strong, robust. They did the job. They were crisp enough. Yeah, so you would not be disappointed, Andrew. Drunken Sailor says, any thoughts on the best methods to catch potty mullet for dew bait, and how do they rank as dew bait? You must get them with a cast net up that way.
Yeah, well, I would if I bait fished. Yeah, so I probably haven't, to be honest, probably haven't used bait for over 10 years. But yeah, certainly up in Queensland, that would be the best way to catch them, is throw a cast net around. I don't know how I'd catch them in New South Wales with a bait trap, I guess, or with a hook and line.
Yeah, I'm pretty hopeless when it comes to a bait trap. I get my friends to do it, so that's the best method. My method has been line with hook and line, which is more targeted. You get the right size, but it's a lot slower. So I like to float bread, and you have to be on the ball. You have to strike when that. So I use bread basically. I put bread on a tiny hook, and I use a twig as my float, which I tie like a really light knot, and so it's almost weightless in the way that I cast it. It's like a little twig about 5 centimeters long that floats on the surface, because twigs float if they're that size, and it keeps the bait on the top, and it's just right there. And once you see that it disappears, strike, and then you'll lift into probably a 15 centimeter mullet, which is perfect, or just a little bit under 15. How do they rank as a dew bait? Well, I haven't actually caught a quarter mulloway on potty mullet yet, but from what I've been told, they're a top bait in the estuaries. So yeah, it's right up there with squid. Nick Penrose says Cook's better than the Georges. Yeah. I think we answered a question like this already. I think I might be losing it because I'm watching a few screens. Ali says, any tips to catch a jewfish? We answered this one, have we?
Want to catch a jewfish on a lure? I would say get yourself some good soft vibes. That would be, I mean, you can use lots of different lures, but a soft vibe to me would be the lure that I'd probably turn to first if I was targeting jewfish, and just work that around places where you can see fish marking up on your sounder. Just very gentle lifts of the rod, and then let it sink back down, keeping in touch with the lure as it sinks back down. You just want to feel that lure vibrate, and you get a bycatch of big flathead and that sort of thing as well. But yeah, the dewies love those soft vibes.
Do you find that they charge the vibe rather than they peck at it like a little?
Yeah, it's not like, look, I haven't. There's no dewies up here. There's black dews. They're a different species, and they fish a bit differently. And so I haven't had a huge opportunity to fish for vibes for them. But when I have, there hasn't been any mistaking. It's not like a brim. You're looking for a little peck and set the hooks. If they're going to take them, they're going to take them hard. And usually, as the lure's falling as well, is when they're going to take them. So lift it up, maybe 2-3 feet off the bottom, and then be prepared as the line's dropping back down. Keep in touch with the lure. That's usually when they'll get eaten.
Yeah, I found most of the time when I hook up with a vibe, it's already running. It's already hit
Yeah.
the ground running, and you couldn't be anything else.
No.
It's the best feeling.
Yeah.
Nicholas Cook says, "Ha ha ha! Shroom got too much skill to catch everything except George's wrist." Yeah, that's right. I hold the record in catching the highest and the biggest George's River specials. Someone take it off me. Someone take those records off me. Nick Penn Prey says Jamie McEwen won ABT Oz Open using Samaki Zings. Well, there you go.
Yeah. And I've interviewed Jamie on the podcast as well, and he mentioned to me that he loves using them because they're they're not a super expensive rod, and so lots of kids and lots of beginners will come along and want to see what he uses, and he can say, well, here's a rod that it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, but it's very, very good. It's good enough quality, and it's very, very capable of catching brim. So
look at this one, Greg. You coming down here, you're gonna be disappointed. They're trying not to. They're trying to convince you not to come down. They're talking it down.
They are talking it down. Look, I come down to Sydney. I've got family down there, so I come down to Sydney from time to time. I don't often fish, I have to say. This time I'm actually coming down to fish in March, so I'm looking forward to it.
It's a good time. It's actually a good time. The autumn months are really good down here. I don't know what species that you're targeting, but brim season in the autumn, beautiful.
Yeah, we'll be targeting probably targeting snapper and kingies, and probably a little bit north of Sydney, but not far north.
Kingfish season now extends practically through to the start of winter, if not through winter as well. Probably the last 3 years, if you go back about 5, okay, maybe autumn, you're looking at the last vestigial pieces of action relating to kingfish. But these days, it's almost an all year round prospect here, so you're definitely gonna hook up to a few of them. Kai says, fast action versus lower action rod. What do you think, just fishing as an all-rounder rod? I personally am now fishing a slow action rod in, and the sensitivity actually helps me a lot with hooking up. Thoughts on that, Greg?
An all-round rod is a bit like an all-round boat or an all-round car. It doesn't really exist. I'd probably go, if you're just having one rod and you're just getting started, I'd say medium action is probably better than a fast or a slow. If I'm casting hard-bodied lures, I like a slow action rod. I like to give the fish. I like to have a little bit of give. The fish usually hit it pretty hard. Depends what species I'm fishing for as well. If I'm casting soft plastics, I generally like a faster action rod because I want to be able to set that hook quickly. I need to be able to work the plastic a little bit more as well. But look, it does depend a little bit on species. I mean, for casting soft plastics to jacks, for example, I like a rod with a little bit more flex in the tip and plenty of grunt in the butt because I want to be able to get the lure speed to be able to skip it. So it's horses for courses. But look, I mean, the obvious answer, mate, is you've got to have at least 2 or 3 fast action rods, 4 or 5 slow action rods, and a couple in between as well. So it's not too late to get your Christmas order in, I'd say.
So how many rods was that? 11? I'm on the same fast action. I mean, I've several rods for chasing a particular species, but plastics certainly I'm leaning towards. These are just general rules. It just depends on what people like. Yep. It's your style of fishing as well. If you strike if you strike really fast and hard, maybe you don't need such a fast action rod with a lot of power in it because all the hook settings done through your right arm as you lift it. But like you said, it just depends. But in general, personally for me, I'm of the similar train of thought. Fast action for plastics, you can feel what the lure is doing. You can impart the little twitches that you require to get that unique action instead of just a very generic double lift or single lift. The slower, more moderate action rods where they bend more towards the butt, that helps when you're using hard bodies with little trebles that are more likely to pull out, especially if it's just tenuously hooked, which is, half the time what happens when you're fishing for brim. They're not, implosion feeders, for example. That hard body is not embedded deep down their throat. It's just on the edges of their lips. So you really don't want to pull those hooks, so the slower action rod helps there. If you don't have the funds to buy 11 rods, then yeah, an all-rounder makes sense in that case, because you can start off with something affordable, learn what you like, and once you find out what style of fishing you prefer, that helps you to determine what you're going to buy next when you start to specialize a little bit more and understand what particular aspects and attributes of a rod make sense to your style of fishing. Like, you know, if you use a really stiff rod, maybe your drag isn't set as tight, for example, to compensate. You know, there's so many ways to just adjust for it.
Yeah, just understand, Kai, that you can never have too many rods. That's the unwritten rule. You can never have too many rods. So start with a medium taper and a medium action, and just build from there.
He says, yep, 11 rods on the list for Christmas. So we got S Factor, Gulp Gel Scent, baby goats, 11 rods, and now a Stella too. Oh wow!
I'm a walking advertisement for tackle companies.
Nick says line management for mulloway is crucial. Mulloway may run with a lure but can spit it unless you hook set them.
Thank you, Nick. I've been meaning to get Nick on my podcast at some stage, so I'm going to have to hit him up.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I love talking about mulloway fishing. It's just it's one of those. It's one of those pinnacles inside of the estuary, if you know what I mean. Like, I know there's heaps of things you can do in fishing, but if you're fishing up a river, there's not much more you can do besides, you know, put at the top of your list to land, you know, a trophy mulloway. And in the Sydney estuaries, especially on a lure, it's very sought after, and it's very difficult with all the fishing pressure. And I can tell you that,
I mean, even in places where there's not as much fishing pressure, you know, when you're first starting out lure fishing, you chase flathead or you chase bream, you chase species that are easy to find. Bream not always so easy to hook, of course, but you know, you go for those sort of bread and butter, easier to catch species, and then you kind of progress to the dewies. I think most people do anyway. So they're not an easy fish, and once you've got them wired, they seem to come a lot more easily. But they're one of those species you're going to put a lot of time, a lot of work into catching before you start to get to that point where you can get them consistently. So, of course, they're a very rewarding fish, and yeah, you got to be rightfully proud if you catch one.
Yeah. All right, we'll answer a couple more questions, and then we're going to wrap up the show. So I don't want to keep you too long. I went from 2 hours to 2.5. This is a funny question. What's your favorite spot? I get asked this all the time, every single video, every single podcast.
My favorite spot is anywhere there's fish biting.
That's right.
Up here in far north Queensland, there's so many places, but as I said, I love my jack fishing. There's just numerous estuaries up here, so I'll just find a little creek, little estuary, sneak in there and sling some plastics around the mangroves, and that's it for me. There's so many.
Yeah, I think this is always a hard question to answer. It always sounds like as though that you're not getting any real help, but it truly is a matter of what you're chasing, where you're chasing, when you're chasing it, and all the conditions and all the factors leading up to the day and time that you're fishing, and that is only a percentage-based play. It's not a guarantee. It's not a yes/no box that you're ticking. It's not a green light, red light. You might be doing everything right, and 99% of the variables are in your favor, but that 1% means that you didn't get lucky that day, and that's just how it is. So every spot has its species. If there's water, at some stage of the tide, there's a fish there somewhere. It's just that technique to pluck them out from that water system, that waterway, might be a bit different. If you're fishing flats, maybe they don't take baits along the bottom. Maybe they only look up and feed off the top, for example. Or maybe they're only feeding on yabbies if you have that bait, but if you use the worm, they wouldn't be interested. There's so many factors. That's literally the best advice from what just Greg said. Wherever the fish is biting, you have to be proactive as an angler. You're angling, you're really testing your mettle and your abilities in searching for the fish. It's an active style of fishing in most cases, especially lure fishing. You're seeking them out. And that's what, you know, that's why we spend a whole lifetime trying to improve and learn. And that's why there is this podcast episode here talking about things that the average person that listened in would think, oh, these guys are crazy. They're talking about, you know, like something about feeling inside the fish's mouth being different to They're thinking, what's going on there? All the cones and the rods in the eyes, 3 types of cones, and there's 40 rods per cone, so they only see contrast better than color. I don't care about that. What's the best color on the shelf? Should I buy watermelon red motor oil or bloodworm?
Yeah. And look, I get asked all the time as well, can you give me a mark for this? Can you give me a mark for finger mark? Or can you give me a mark for crocodile? A spot is just a spot. And because there were fish there yesterday or last week or last month, doesn't mean that there's going to be fish there today or tomorrow or next month. It really comes down to fish move around. The spot doesn't change, but the fish move around. And so you've got to be observant. You've got to get out on the water and learn those signs, those indicators are going to show you where you should fish. What's the tide doing? What's the wind doing? Is there an eddy? Is there an algal bloom? Is there something going on that gives you a clue? Are there birds around? And so you've got to get out in the water and spend that time. So you can have as many marks as you like. Some of them will fish well under some conditions. Others will fish well under other conditions. So giving somebody a particular spot doesn't necessarily guarantee they're going to go and catch fish there. So unfortunately, the only way to do it is to spend more time fishing. Or fortunately, whichever way you look at it.
Andrew says, hey Doc, whenever you are fishing on land, are you scared of crocs? I don't think I'd have the guts to fish land-based in Cairns.
Yeah, I'm scared of crocs. That's why I'm still alive. The good thing about crocodiles is they're quite predictable animals, right? And so generally, if you look at the statistics, I think it's about 17 people have been killed in Queensland by crocs since about 1970 or something like that. It's not a high number, and most of those people were doing something that was just asking for trouble. Now, I live in a place where crocs are just a part of life. We've got lots of things up here. We've got crocs, we've got stingers, we've got stinging trees. We've got lots of things. Fishing from the bank's just a matter of common sense. And certainly I've been places where I've had crocs stalking me, and you see them. The ones you see are the ones that you're not so worried about. It's the ones you can't see that you should worry about. But where they're looking for prey. You know how they hunt. They're very instinctive animals. They've been around for millions of years, and they haven't really changed much over millions of years. And so you can predict them, and a bit of common sense is what it takes, and especially fishing at night. Especially fishing at night, you've got to be super careful. I've had situations where I've thrown crab pots in at night, and I've come back to pick them up, and I've shone the light down. I've tied the rope off to a tree, and I've shone the light down. There's a croc lying across the rope, and I've gone, well, I'll come back and pick that one up later. So there's plenty of them here. They generally don't cause you a problem unless you're doing something stupid. And look, I've seen people here in Cairns. We've got a creek that runs through town, Saltwater Creek. The local Department of Environment and Science guys tell me who do the croc management here. They tell me that they trap more crocs in that particular creek than anywhere around Cairns. And I've seen people wading it up to their waist throwing cast nets. I've seen people with their kids running around the banks, and sooner or later somebody's going to get taken, but it's because they're doing really, really silly things, And so bit of common sense, understand the animal and understand how they hunt and where they hunt, and stay back from the water's edge a little bit. Don't climb out on trees and things that overhang the water. They can jump quite high, and you won't have any problems. But up here, there's thousands of people here in Cairns that go fishing every weekend, and there's rarely a problem with crocs. So, yeah.
All right, last 2 questions. These ones are still pretty long. Kai says, can a constant switch of lures actually confuse a fish, making that fish not hit any lure you throw? I do switch up after a long time with no hits, but can switching lures too quick be a mistake?
I think it could be a mistake more in that you need to use a lure for long enough to be sure that it's not working, right? Just because you put a lure past a fish once or twice or 3 times doesn't necessarily mean that the fish is going to eat it or not eat it. I think a lot of people spend too much time changing lures, and so you're not really getting to know a particular lure well enough to be able to use it really well. So I'd recommend having a handful of lures that you get to know really well and fishing those ones hard. Now, obviously, if you're not getting fish and there are fish around and you've been fishing for 20 minutes or 25 minutes or however long you want to go for, change lures. But look, I've fished and regularly fish all day without changing a lure here when I'm jack fishing. And I know that I'm using a lure that works, and it's just a case of plugging away until I find a jack that's going to eat it. And so you're not wasting any time tying on new lures. Now, it'd be completely different, if I could see fish and they weren't taking them, then I'm going to experiment and try some different things. But I'm probably going to try a different retrieve or a different way of working that lure before I actually change the lure over. So, if you're changing lures too quickly, you're just not going to use any of them until you're confident and comfortable with them and know that it's not a problem with the way you're using it.
All right, Greg, one last question. I've kept you long enough. I get carried away. The questions never end. Nathan, you asked whether he was still around. Well, he's back now if he has it. Yeah. He says, "Hey Greg, do you get big barra in cans? Something about I went near a croc at Wook Runoff. Is that it?"
Doesn't mean anything to me, mate. We get some seriously big barramundi in cans. I suspect that there's a handful of really serious local barra fishermen that catch the majority of those big fish, and it's hard for people who come up here, for a short time to get them wide, and you probably want to go out with a guide or something to find the lay of the land and make sure that you're not wasting your time. But we get some seriously big barra here. I forgot what the rest of that question was.
Wook Runoff.
If you're seeing crocs, there's barra around. Crocs love barra. Okay, so there's always crocs where there are barra and vice versa. But we don't get in the Cairns area, in the wet tropics in general. So I'm talking here from kind of Hinchinbrook up to the Daintree area. The fishing's a little bit different to other parts of Australia. If you compare it with the Fitzroy Basin, for example, Fitzroy River's got massive side channels and floodplains and all kinds of stuff. We don't have that so much up here. We've got the Great Divide is quite close to the water here, so it's only a few kilometres from the mountain range to the sea. So we get short, flashy catchments, and they can be quite tricky to fish. And so we don't tend to get in a lot of those. We tend to get smaller barra in quite reasonable numbers, and then we've got a few places where we get some pretty good barra. And there's plenty of places up here where metre 10, metre 20 barra aren't too hard to find, but the locals kind of keep them a bit of a secret. So it's hard if you're coming up, and you're probably not going to. I was going to say you're probably not going to catch them off the land, but look, I've seen metre barra caught off the esplanade at Cairns land-based fishing. So you just got to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. All right, I'll answer this one real quick, and you answer one last question because there's some name calling in the chat now.
This is like I'm going to have one last card.
Mo Ali CVT says, "What bait do you use for brim?" If I'm using baits for brim, I'm using fresh prawns, and I'm using mullet strips, and bread. In the daytime, I find bread just floated down, weightless, against a boat ramp or a pontoon does the damage if the current isn't so quick. So they're my baits. So hopefully that answers your question. And the final question for the podcast, Ian says, "What knots do you use?"
Okay, I use 2 knots. The only 2 knots you need to learn. I use an FG knot for connecting my line to my leader, and I use a lefty's loop or a similar loop knot for attaching my lure to the leader. Sometimes I will use a clinch knot depending on the lure I'm using, but usually it'll be a lefty's loop. But definitely you want an FG knot for tying it, particularly when we're fishing for barra, mangrove jacks, and those sorts of things, because we're using, I might be using 20 or 30 pound braid, but I'm using 60 pound leader sometimes, or 80 pound leader even for big barra. You want a knot that's going to go through the guides. And so you want a really slim knot, and that's why the FG is the one to use. It's also a particularly strong knot, and once you've gotten used to tying it, it's not a difficult one to tie. And the lefty's loop, of course, because when you're tying a lure on, you want a little bit of movement there, because if you tie a clinch knot to a lot of lures, you're going to kill the action of the lure off completely. So having a loop knot gives the lure a bit more room to move, and particularly things like hard bodies, you get a lot more action out of a lure with a loop knot. So I hope that answers your question.
They're actually the knots that I use. I use an FG, a lefty's loop for hard bodies if it doesn't have a split ring, but most of the time I'm using a double uni. Sorry, a regular uni, a uni knot.
Yep.
But I'm using 6 pound, you see. You're using 60 pound where the lure is restricted by movement. Down here, if I'm using 6 pound, it's not an issue. Do you have any opinions with the clinch versus the uni? Do you have any experiences with the uni knot?
No. Look, a uni knot's a good knot as well. There's so many knots around you can use. I mean, sometimes and this is only a recent thing for me. I always used to tie lures on with a loop knot, but recently I've started using fast hatch clips as well for some styles of fishing, and so I'm not tying knots all the time, not cutting my leader down. But you're right. If you're using 60-pound leader, and quite often we'll be using that with a suspending, 75 or 80 millimeter long hard body, that leader is so stiff and that lure is so small and light that it just kills the action dead. And same thing with stick baits and things as well. You've got to have that little bit of loose movement there. I'm not a great fan of split rings on the nose of the lure. I usually take them off and tie a loop knot in preference to tying onto a split ring. But occasionally now I'm using the fast hatch clips.
That's great, Greg. Thank you very much for coming on to the Shroom Live podcast. It was a pleasure to have you on. I can't believe nearly 3 hours has passed. I didn't want to keep you too long, but then I thought, the questions kept coming and coming and coming. It's usually the case where I have to cut it short after many, many hours. We probably need a bit of a toilet break as well at this stage. So it's good to know that, all the scents that I'm using are effective. The knots that you're using are practically the knots that I'm using. Everything just scientifically is sound, and that makes me feel good about my fishing. And I got to get those baby goats, I guess.
Great minds think alike, Shroom. So we're on the same track on a few things. That's great. And thank you so much for having me along. It's been an absolute blast. Doesn't feel like 3 hours, I got to tell you. I've enjoyed the chat, and there's been lots of great questions. I really appreciate all the questions that have been asked. So thank you so much.
Guys, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you hit the like button on the way out. And if you missed a bit of the show or you want to catch it after this show ends, it's still on YouTube. You can watch it here. You can watch it on Facebook, and of course on the podcast platforms, all your popular ones, Spotify, Apple, Google, etc., etc. That'll be up on the next, in the next day or so. So, if you want to listen to this on Monday on the way to work, that's a good time to load it up. And guys, thanks for your support as always. And I'll see you on the Thursday for another fishing vlog. And Greg, thanks for coming along again.
Thanks, everyone.